Chapter 230. AF3. The name was too vague. Be it intermediate education or advanced education, there were too many schools with AF3. The only difference was the affiliation. Therefore, when Bell said that he was from AF3, everyone was trying to guess which AF3 he was from. After all, no one would think of the top AF3 in the first place. The third advanced education school affiliated to the RAS was either a top noble or a genius. Geniuses were everywhere there, and any one of them was enough to make other advanced education schools fight over it. Many schools would fight for the second place in the empire, but no one dared to mess with the first place. It was the acknowledged boss. As for the advanced education schools affiliated to the RAS and AF2, they didn't participate in the ranking. They weren't even on the same level. In other words, they weren't considered traditional advanced education schools anymore. The rain in Barenbader came and went as quickly as it came. A rainbow floated above the man-made lake not far away. However, no one was in the mood to look at the rainbow. The school guards had surrounded the area, and the school doctors were busy treating the injured. The conflict had caused a lot of damage, and some of the students might be in danger if they weren't rescued in time. The school doctors glanced at the broken blades on the ground and the broken metal utensils. They turned around and focused on treating the injured. It was better not to get involved. The deputy head of teaching was not stupid. He did not say anything when he heard the words AF3. After all, there were two advanced education schools with the words AF3 in the star sector. They were not bad. He even planned to send a batch of graduates there. He had to get to the bottom of the kid's background first. If the kid was close to the leaders of the two schools, he'd have to think twice. However, the vice dean of students couldn't afford to be weak in front of so many students. The vice director of teaching put his hands behind his back and straightened his back. Gathering his strength, he pointed at Bell with his chin and said in what he thought was a dignified tone, "Which AF3 are you? What's going on?" Before the deputy head of teaching could finish his words, he was interrupted by a loud shout. In fact, the voice of the person who interrupted the deputy head of teaching was not too loud, but it was imposing. It was different from the deputy head of teaching, who was weak on the inside but weak on the inside. Hearing this voice, people would feel a sense of awe. The deputy director of teaching's imposing manner, which he had worked so hard to build up, suddenly dissipated. When he heard the voice, he swallowed his words and his expression changed. He squeezed out a smile on his chubby face and looked in the direction of the voice. The crowd parted on their own, and a flying car landed not far away from them. A man wearing an imperial military uniform, and judging from the epaulets on his shoulder, he was a major. He was slightly older than Sillin and Bell, but he could still be considered young. There were a couple of people behind the major. Sillin didn't recognize them, but the other students did. From the students' whispers, Sillin learned that the people behind the major were the headmaster and the vice-headmasters of Barenbader Academy. The fact that the principal of an intermediate school was standing obediently behind the major showed that he wasn't a simple man. Some of the people who had been fighting with each other earlier lowered their heads when they saw the major, but that only served to expose themselves. After a few bangs, a few people who weren't Barenbader's men were kicked out from the crowd and returned to their original adult forms. Just like Sillin, the students didn't see the major's movements clearly. They only heard a few thuds before they were kicked out of the crowd and sprawled on the ground. The young major sneered. He didn't say a word, but his laughter was enough to make the people on the ground tremble in fear. The vice dean, who thought he had a lot of energy before, was now silent. He didn't even dare to make a sound. He glanced at the principal and hurried over to him as if the principal was his savior. The major was aware of the vice dean's actions, but he didn't bother to pay attention. He swept his gaze across the crowd and paused for a moment when he saw Celine. Then, he swept his gaze across the others. Bell was on the other side, his umbrella closed. The crowd was blocking his view, so the major didn't notice Bell at first glance. His gaze wasn't sharp, but it was extremely oppressive. It was as if a giant hand was strangling them by the neck and pressing them to the ground. Most of the students lowered their heads to avoid eye contact with the major. Even the guards didn't dare to look him in the eye, except for Silen. After scanning the crowd, the major said, "I'll give you 3 seconds." Less than 3 seconds after the major's words left his mouth, a few people who were not students of Baron Bader High School walked out from the crowd. The ferocity of the previous fight had disappeared, and each of them stood in front of their companions who had been kicked to the ground like little wives. They didn't dare provoke this man. Even their boss had to be respectful in front of him, let alone small fries like them. Scram! I'll deal with you guys later. The group sighed in relief when they heard the major's words. They dragged their fallen comrade to the side, but they didn't dare to go too far. If they did, they'd die. However, as they walked, they glanced at the comrade that Silen was sitting on. The comrade wasn't pretending to be unconscious anymore, and he was blinking at them for help. The students who were about to scram noticed the comrade's pleading eyes and looked at the major, who was standing there like a gun. They didn't even have the courage to open their mouths. As soon as the major tilted his head in their direction, the few of them no longer paid any attention to their miserable comrade, and scampered off to one side. The major looked at Silen again, then walked straight towards Silen. "Major Tosin." The headmaster was about to say something, but Tosin shot him a look and forced him to swallow his words. He stood there awkwardly and turned to look at the vice director of teaching who was running towards him. He finally found a punching bag, but he didn't dare to speak loudly. Bell didn't go over. Although he hadn't seen Tosin in person, he knew who he was when the headmaster said the name. Before coming to the 23rd star region, Bell had done some research on the people in this star region. Among them was Tosin. Nahachi Tosin. Every noble family had their own influence in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. For example, the Sizer family was famous for their flying car manufacturing industry, and the Nahachi family was very influential in the military. Although they weren't as influential as the monarch and the three kings, they were still one of the giants. The Nahachi family had produced many famous generals, and many of the envoys the students studied under had the surname Nahachi. Tosin was almost 10 years older than Bell, and he was also a graduate of AF3. Even now, his name was still on the list of outstanding graduates of AF3. It would be hard for Bell not to know about the man who used to be famous in AF3. His teachers often used Tosin as an example in their classes. Even though Tosin was walking towards him, Silen didn't look like he was going to back down. He stared straight at Tosin without any intention of backing down. It wasn't that Silen was arrogant, but Silen knew from the first moment he saw Tosin that he couldn't show weakness in front of a person like this. If he did, he would lose everything. It was all about strength, not status. Tosin looked a bit like Knight. That was why Silen felt a sense of familiarity when facing Tosin. It was the same feeling he had when Knight first stood in front of him. Tosin stared at the young man in front of him. Tosin was a few years younger than him, but he didn't show any signs of weakness. He was the one sitting there, and it was the kid who was looking up at him, but Tosin felt like they were at the same level. Every one of them had a unique aura that was either strong or weak. When Silen and Tuasen got closer and closer to each other, their auras clashed against each other, causing the surrounding people to feel as if the air had thickened a little. Tosin didn't stop until he was right in front of Silen. He didn't say a word and reached out to grab the person Silen was sitting on. His movement wasn't fast, so everyone around him could see it clearly. What happened next, however, was a blur for the students. Silen grabbed Tosin's wrist, flipped over, and launched an elbow strike at Tosin's throat. At the same time, he used his knee to knock back Tosin's leg. However, Silen's elbow strike didn't succeed either. It was blocked by Tosin's palm. It was obviously just a palm, but it was like a steel shield that stopped the attack. Not only did it stop, but it also pushed back. Both of them had fast reactions, and each attack was faster than the last. At first, the students could still see a little shadow, but as time went by, it became blurry. They could only hear the sounds of bangs, but they didn't know what happened to the two. The time the two exchanged blows was very short, no more than 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the two had exchanged dozens of blows. Moreover, both of them only needed one hit to make the other lose the ability to fight. When the students could see clearly again, Sillin and Tosin were still standing there. However, their positions had changed. Tosin was standing next to the person Sillin had knocked down, while Sillin was standing where Tosin had been. The students could only see the result of the exchange from the clothes of the two, but unfortunately, they couldn't see anything. Both of them looked the same as before. However, now many people were somewhat afraid of Sillin, especially those who had rolled to the side. Now, they were quite glad that they didn't attack Sillin, or else they would have been crippled. They didn't know how many times they had been crippled by Tosin or Tosin's subordinates. Otherwise, they wouldn't be like mice that had seen a cat when they saw this person. Tosin moved his palm. It was a little hot and numb. He didn't expect this kid to be so strong. At the same time, Tosin was also shocked by Sillin's strength. Others might not know, but Tosin himself was very clear. Others might be surprised that Sillin was able to fight with Tosin without being at a disadvantage, but Tosin knew that he had already lost. He didn't need to touch his gun to know that the gun in the holster had fallen apart. The only thing that had caused the gun to fall apart was Sillin's fist that had brushed past his clothes. That was the only opportunity that could have allowed the kid to do such a thing. Tosin didn't expect that the kid wouldn't be able to return empty-handed. The corner of Tosin's lips curled up. He wasn't the slightest bit annoyed at his loss. He kicked the person on the ground with his heel, resetting the dislocated bone. Although it was still painful, he could at least get up and walk for a bit. Moreover, he would rather endure the pain and roll away than stay with these two. "What's your name, kid?" Tosin looked at Sillin, his eyes emotionless. Even if he admired Sillin, he didn't show it on his face. "None of your business." The words weren't spoken by Sillin. Before Sillin could open his mouth, Belle had already rushed over to answer. In this place, the prince was the only one who dared to shout at a major like this, and this major was a great noble no less. Tosin's face visibly stiffened when he saw Belle striding toward him. The corner of his eyes twitched, and twitched again. Why the hell did I run into this little ancestor? It made sense though. Even the two Blaze Eagles were here, so it wasn't strange that this little ancestor would be here. However, running into this little ancestor wasn't a good thing. Tuasen was well aware of the famous hedonistic sons and daughters of the nobility. Most of them were arrogant in public, but they had to lower their necks in front of their own fathers. Belle was an exception. He wasn't even afraid of the Fire Eagle King, and there was no one in the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire who didn't know that he was the most reckless and unreasonable person in the empire. Tosin curled his lips. I didn't expect to see His Highness here. His Highness? The people around him were dumbfounded, especially the vice director. He wanted to die right now. What the hell did he do just now? Did he just point at the prince and lecture him? No matter which royal highness it wasn't someone he could say anything to. Moreover, the three royal families were famous for their bad tempers. This was bad, this was really bad. This time, it was really hard for him to absolve himself from the blame. Chang 3 and Chang 4's mouths fell open in shock. Is this really a prince? Is there a prince with ears like this? He was just skinning a frog in the kitchen just a moment ago. The principal and the others finally realized what was going on. A prince? Could he be the prince of the Blaze Eagle royal family? Only the Blaze Eagle royal family had come to this place. Some of the students had thought of the possibility as well, but they didn't dare say anything after what had just happened. Belle ignored everyone else's reaction and looked at Tosin like he was a thief. He nudged him and said, "Aren't the military supposed to be a bunch of busy people? Don't get involved in this. Go back to your own business, you don't have to worry about this." He then looked at the principal who was twirling his fingers. "The school will take care of this, right?" Of course, the principal promised. Even though he was a noble, his family's social status was nothing compared to the royals. To be honest, a single word from Belle could force him out of office. There's no rush. I'm just here to take a look at the campus. I heard it's a great place to relax. Why don't we find a place to talk? Even though it was a question, Tosin's expression suggested that he had already made up his mind. There are many places to talk in the school. I'll arrange them for you. The principal said hurriedly. No need. Belle cut him off, we shouldn't get involved in military matters. We're just normal students, after all. We won't be involved in military matters while we're still in higher education. The vice dean's heart skipped a beat when he heard Belle say that he was still in higher education. Fortunately, he fainted right away. Since it was His Royal Highness, which other AFC3 could it be? I can't say for sure. I was also involved in military missions while I was still in school. Tosin waved his hand carelessly. You said it yourself, not us. We're just bad students who don't want to learn. We just want to have fun, Belle said like a spoiled brat. Let me tell you, don't talk to us anymore. Billy pulled Sillin and charged out. Hey, Your Highness, let's talk. Nope. Nope. Just give up your heart. It was rare that Belle remembered to catch the loophole in Angor's words as he ran. Tosin smiled as he watched Belle drag Sillin away. Just you wait, kid. Ignoring the people around him who were still confused by their conversation, Tosin walked back to the flying car and drove it away. The principals had finally regained their authority and were now directing the guards and medical staff to deal with the situation. Those who had been forgotten by the side looked at each other. In the end, they obediently went back to find Tosin to be punished. This time, not only would they have to stay in jail, they would also have to suffer physical pain. Sigh. Tosin returned to the place the school had arranged for him. He took out his gun holster and poured out the parts inside. With a flick of his fingers, he quickly assembled the parts into a perfect gun. Tosin looked at the gun and put it back into the holster. He tapped his finger on the table, deep in thought. The two lieutenants behind Tosin exchanged a look when they saw the smile on their superior's face. Their superior was probably up to something again. Belle dragged Sillin back to Changfor's dormitory. The first thing he said was, Sillin, don't be tricked by that guy. Don't go to the military. Don't join the military. Damn it, he's trying to poach the Fire Eagle royalty. No way. Not even a window. Sillin thought to himself, since when did I become a member of the Fire Eagle royalty? Although it was a hierarchical social system, the various major powers still valued some outstanding talents. Poaching and snatching people away from others was not uncommon among the various powers. Let me tell you, the military is hard and tiring, and you can't get anything good. I bet you won't even get a wife. You're a bunch of men, and you might not even see a single girl for a few years. Think about it, it's great now. You can do whatever you want, pick up girls if you want, and be as carefree as you want. Why would you go to the military and ask for trouble? Belle rattled off a long list of the disadvantages of the military, but Sillin just nodded. The prince must have suffered a lot in the past, or he wouldn't be able to speak so profoundly and with so many vivid expressions on his face. Beside him, Kurt held a few roasted frogs in his hands, unable to get a word in. Chapter 231. Sillin felt like Belle was possessed. Why did he say that? Maybe it was because he'd brought up too many of Belle's tragic past experiences. Belle was in the middle of recounting the 7th time his father had beaten him to a pulp and thrown him, along with Uligano of the Blizzard Wendiska royal family, into the royal army to train with the guards when his communicator rang. Belle furrowed his brows when he saw the unknown code on the communicator. He accepted the call. Your Highness Scoble. Tosin's face appeared on the screen. Beep. Belle immediately cut off the call and blocked the number the moment he saw Tosin's face. Where were we? Belle asked Sillin. Sillin made a 7 sign with his fingers. Oh, right. The seventh time I was caught. Bell was about to continue when his communicator rang again. He looked at the code and saw that it was from Muzo. What is it? Bell asked impatiently. Muzo's smile was a little stiff. Your Highness, Tuasen just said, beep. Bell cut off the call and took off the communicator on his wrist. He looked around the room before throwing the communicator into the oven with a thud. Silen. Was it necessary? On the other side, Muzo stared at the disconnected communicator with a wry smile. He turned to the other side of the room and saw Tuasen's image on the screen. You saw how stubborn His Highness is. He won't give face to anyone. Plus, we've never had any face in front of His Highness. All right then. I'll contact Prince Zhen Xingming and have him contact His Highness Scoble himself. Tuasen put his legs on the table after ending the call and propped his chin up with his fingers. Originally, he wasn't looking for Tuasen because of Silen. He was looking for him to pass on a message. Before coming to Baron Bader, Tuasen had run into Zhen Xingming of the Fuji royal family on a planet. He asked Tuasen to pass on a message to Bell and ask him to find him there. But now, it seemed that Bell didn't want to hear Tuasen's voice at all. He was guarding against Tuasen like he was a thief. The more it was like this, the more curious Tuasen became. Although he had only exchanged blows with Silen for 2 short seconds, those 2 seconds were enough to prove Silen's strength. Other than that and the fact that he had unholstered his gun without realizing it, what else did Silen have that Bell would treat him this way? Although Bell was an unreliable prince with an unorthodox way of thinking and often acted foolishly, every member of the royal family wasn't as simple as they seemed. Bell might seem like an idiot sometimes, but sometimes he was more cunning than a fox. To be able to make him want to pull Silen into the Fire Eagle royal family like this, just what was it for? He looked at the information his subordinates had gathered on Silen, but it was so little that he couldn't glean anything from it at all. Not to mention that the Sizer family was behind all of this. It was obvious that the truth about Silen had been obscured. Just what kind of person was a person that even the Sizer family and a prince of the Fire Eagle royal family had a grudge against? The joint military exercise was drawing near, and everyone was busy trying to find good seedlings. Otherwise, Tuasen wouldn't have come to Baron Bader to try his luck. After all, every school had their own special talents. They were trained specifically for the military, and their curricula were all geared towards military development. Baron Bader was Tuasen's 5th stop. He hadn't found anyone he liked in the previous 4 stops, and he didn't expect to find anyone outstanding in an intermediate school. But he didn't expect to run into someone like Silen here. Silen didn't give Tuasen the impression that he was a student at all. He reminded Tuasen of the people at AF1 and AF2. However, there was something about Silen that was clearly different from them. Why was that? He was like a killer, but he was different from them. He was like the people at AF1 and AF2, but he was clearly different from them. It was too hard to understand. It was no wonder that Tuasen couldn't figure it out. After all, hunters didn't make up as many people in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire as they did in the League of Stars. There were hunters in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, but they were much weaker than the hunters in the League of Stars. The great nobles had absolute control over manpower and resources, and the royal army and the Empire's joint defense force would never allow a large organization like hunter regiments to appear in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. If they were searching for rare minerals or exploring an unknown star region, the great nobles would pay a huge sum of money to gather a group of people to do it, and the rewards would belong to the great nobles. Therefore, as a hunter, Silen could not be understood by others. Unable to think of a reason, Tuasen took the communicator and keyed in a series of characters that looked like a combination lock. A while later, the call connected. A beautiful blonde woman with a hot body appeared on the screen. Yo, little Tuasen, how did you find the time to contact me? You haven't contacted us since you were demoted. We miss you so much. If it was anyone else who heard this hot girl's words, their imagination would definitely run wild. But Tuasen shivered and hurriedly said with a smile, Teacher Griffin, please don't miss me. I can't withstand your torment. Although Tuasen used to study at AF3, he had gone to AF1 and AF2 for training. Those training were very helpful for Tuasen when he carried out military missions. Among the people who trained Tuasen was this blonde beauty, Griffin. Although Griffin had a hot body and looked to be in her 20s, this AF2 teacher was actually about the same age as Tuasen's grandmother. She was also very skilled, and she even had the military rank of colonel on her back. Tuasen couldn't help but shiver when he thought of the terrible situation during training. Teacher Griffin, I have something to ask you today. I want to ask you about a person. Tuasen, who had a dignified look in front of Principal Baronbader and so many other people, was still an obedient student in front of Griffin. He was even more obedient than he was in front of his father. Sigh, I knew you would be like this, little heartless person. When you have nothing to do, you don't even think of us. Only when you have something to do, you remember that there are people like us. Griffin twirled a strand of her hair around her finger and sighed. Tuasen smiled awkwardly. He knew that Griffin wasn't angry. This was just their usual way of talking. Tell me, who do you want to ask about? I'll say this first, don't come to us asking for people. I can't bear to throw them to your damn place. So in your eyes, the 23rd Military Region is a damn place? Ahem, here's the thing. I want to ask, is there a person named Sillin in AF1 or AF2? Oh, I have his image here. Tuasen played Sillin's image for Griffin to see. The image was the moment when Tuasen first took Sillin away. Sillin sat on the person who was lying on the ground and raised his head to look directly at Tuasenator. After looking directly at Tuasen, Sillin's eyes looked at the flying car behind Tuasenator. It was the car that Tuasen drove over, a military flying car. There was a surveillance camera on it, and Sillin was looking in the direction of this surveillance camera. And the surveillance camera only captured this part of the video. Griffin couldn't see the look in Sillin's eyes when he looked at Tuasen, but the moment Sillin looked at the monitor, that look. Griffin narrowed her eyes. Her fingers that were playing with her hair had already let go of it, and she gently rubbed a canine tooth along her red lips. When Tuasen saw Griffin like this, the hairs on his back all stood up. As someone who had been through this, he knew too well what this habit of Griffin's meant. In this case, their military region wouldn't be able to get people over. Ahem, this. Ms. Griffin, since you're busy, I won't bother you anymore, A soft and slightly raised tone of voice made Tuasen not dare to hang up the communicator. He obediently waited for Griffin to continue. Little Tuasen, tell me, what's this kid's name again? Griffin asked. Sillin, Tuasen answered obediently. In his heart, Tuasen had already cursed himself 1,000 times. How could he be infected by that idiot Belle? He couldn't think straight and actually went to Ms. Griffin. It's over, it's over. He went for wool and came home shorn. So his name is Sillin. Little Tuasen, when do you have the chance to get Sillin over to me? Griffin said with a bright smile. Tuasen wanted to cry. Get him over. How am I supposed to do it? This. Ms. Griffin, it seems a bit difficult. Tuasen's voice became smaller and smaller. Tell me about it. Ugh, he's not only backed by the Sizer family, but also the Fire Eagle Royals. I also want to get Sillin over to our 23rd MR, but that Scoble guy is guarding against me like a thief. I can't find a chance. Hearing Tuasen's words, Griffin snorted and laughed. Little Tuasen, you're really living more and more backward after being sent to the 23rd MR. Never mind. I'm in a good mood today, so I won't argue with you. Don't worry about Sillin, I won't let any military region drag Sillin into it. These words sounded a bit arrogant. How could a mere school teacher and a colonel have the confidence to say something like this? There were so many military regions in the empire. How many generals were there? How could a colonel like you have the right to speak? However, this was exactly what Griffin was capable of. Tuasen was very clear about this. Moreover, many generals were under Griffin's command. Yes, Ma, am. Good boy. Tuosun let out a long sigh of relief after Griffin finally disconnected from the communicator. Although it had been a few years since he left the academy, he still couldn't help but shudder at the sight of this teacher. It's like I did something bad. Tuosun rubbed his chin. Forget it, I won't inform Belle and Sillin. Belle won't let me finish my sentence anyway. I'll let them worry about it when the time comes. Now it seems that even if the 23rd MR couldn't get him, the other military regions wouldn't be able to either. After ending the call with Tuosun, Griffin turned on a holographic display and flipped through the records inside. She found a video record and compared it to the one Tuosun showed her with Sillin's image. The look in their eyes was too similar. But of course, he knew his own student very well. He knew what kind of experience, personality, and habits he had. But what kind of person was Celine? It seemed that there were still a lot of treasures hidden away from them. Right now, Sillin was eating roasted frogs with Belle, Chang 3, and Chang 4. He had no idea that he was being targeted by a lot of people. After taking care of Chang 3 and Chang 4's business, Sillin was about to return to Old Man Chang's place. However, Belle picked up a call and dragged Sillin to another planet in Sector 23. Before he departed, Sillin contacted Old Man Chang to learn about the shop and Chang Xiao's recovery. However, he didn't use his own communicator. Instead, he used the public communicator of the Vice Director of Education's office. In Belle's words, they didn't have to pay for the communication fee. Compared to Sillin's own crappy communicator, the images were much clearer. It would be a waste not to make use of a ready-made resource. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire was a good choice. All of its subsectors were connected to the same communication network, so communication was much easier. Sillin and Belle hadn't even stayed in Barenbader for a day, but the commotion they caused was enough to be recorded as one of the 10 most influential events in Barenbader's history. Because on this day, some people in Barenbader saw the Prince of the Fire Eagle royal family, who was studying in the 3rd Advanced Education School affiliated to the Royal Academy of Sciences that everyone dreamed of. They saw Major Tosin, who was born a great noble, fighting a young man to a standstill. Although the two fought for a short time, and no one could see their movements clearly, they saw the principal and other leaders of the school trembling in fear before them. Regardless, Chang 3 and Chang 4 were no longer looked down upon by the nobles. In the eyes of others, they had the support of the Prince of the Fire Eagle royal family. The school leaders also saw them as seedlings with a bright future. Kurt, the one who helped them roast the frogs, often bragged about how he once sat at the same table as the prince and ate roasted frogs together. As for Celine, he seemed to have become a burden, a foil that was placed beneath the Prince of the Fire Eagle royal family and Major Tosin. Only a small number of people paid more attention to Sillin, and this small number of people would go on to achieve great things in the future, including Lu Jia and Tai Tuesday. Sillin and Belle sat on Belle's 4-passenger spaceplane and flew toward Jen Xingming's planet. Muzo and Ikiki stayed behind to smooth out the waves caused by their departure. Inside the spaceplane, Sillin rubbed the area where the leaf pattern ring was. Sillin had put on a pair of gloves not long after he arrived at the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. This was one of the reasons why Belle hadn't discovered the secret on Sillin's finger until now. Genya once said that the ring would resonate with him when he was sent home. But when would it resonate? Would it resonate with a direct descendant of the Gen family? Would Jen Xingming, the son of the current King Fuji, cause the ring to resonate with him? Sillin was looking forward to it. Chapter 232. Belle's spaceplane wasn't stopped by any patrol ships on the outskirts of the planet, nor did it receive an identity verification request from the defense network. Belle's spaceplane flew straight to the planet unimpeded. Inside a patrol ship on the outskirts of the planet, a couple of patrolling soldiers exchanged worried glances with each other. The reason why they didn't intercept and inspect the spaceship was because their scanner had already scanned the identity code on the spaceship. Based on the identity code in the scan result, they knew very well what kind of person this spaceship belonged to. It was a spaceplane belonging to the Fire Eagle royalty, and judging from the numbers on the code, the owner of the spaceplane must have a very high status in the family. Who would have the guts to stop it? It didn't take long for Muzo and Ikiki to arrive as well. The patrolling soldiers quickly reported the situation to their superiors when they saw the large Blaze Eagle emblem. Muzo and Ikiki were in charge of dealing with the planetary government. Bell never did anything about it. He took out his new communicator and started contacting people. "Hey, where are you? I'm already here. Come out and welcome me." Bell was answered with a beep. Fuck. That bastard must be hitting on a girl again. Bell wasn't really angry. He brought up the control screen on his communicator and began searching for the coordinates of Zhen Xingming's signal. Then, the spaceplane automatically moved to the nearest large parking lot. Zhen Xingming was currently in the city. After parking the spaceplane, Bell and Sillin walked to their destination together. It was nighttime right now, and it hadn't been long since the start of the night. The rich nightlife in the city made it just as lively at night as it was during the day. The colorful screens in the city center shone brightly and proclaimed the city's vitality. Sillin looked up and saw a shining skyscraper not far away. It was like a road sign that guided people to this area. The skyscraper wasn't the tallest building in the city. There were a lot of buildings taller than it, but it was the tallest in this area. In other words, this area was not an area filled with tall buildings. In this prosperous area, what was important was its uniqueness, not its height. There were all kinds of buildings of all shapes and sizes, and every one of them had their own unique style that would make people remember them. For example, Sillin and Bell's destination, a bar. From the outside, this bar looked like a goblet filled with wine. You could even see the building behind the wine glass through the glass. The color of the wine in the transparent glass changed. Transparent, clear yellow, intense red, azure. There was a hint of longing in the illusion, adding a sense of mystery and ambiguity. The people who entered seemed to have disappeared into the cup of pure wine, and no one could be seen from the outside. This was actually a special kind of building material that made light deceive people's vision. To be able to design and build the bar like this, it could be seen that the owner of the bar had put in a lot of effort. After entering through a door at the foot of the cup, what he felt was completely different from the outside. It was divided into several areas, some with a more flamboyant and free style, and some with a more leisurely and romantic style. After entering the door, he could see a hint, and according to the style he liked, he could go to different areas and enjoy the atmosphere that suited him. Bell went straight to a more flamboyant area. As soon as he walked in, he was greeted by an explosive rhythm. Hui Mao wagged his tail and moved his claws along with the rhythm. The atmosphere here is so familiar. Of course it's familiar. Sillin could still clearly remember the time when Hui Mao and Lycrabe were dancing at Acerella's dance night in the League of Stars. Flicking the restless Hui Mao on his shoulder, Sillin walked in as well. Bell looked around. He didn't need to search to know that there was a circle of people on the dance floor, and Zhen Xingming was in the middle of that circle. Right now, Prince Zhen Xingming was dancing with a beautiful girl in a tight miniskirt. His hands were still wandering around the deep cleavage between her breasts. The people watching the dance screamed and whistled frivolously, but the two people on the dance floor didn't seem to be affected at all. Bell curled his lips. No wonder the guy ignored his communicator. He's busy picking up girls. Look at how they're flirting with each other. He looked around and noticed that all the girls' attention was focused on Zhen Xingming's face. Bell couldn't strike up a conversation even if he wanted to. He looked around and noticed that all the women's attention was focused on Zhen Xingming's face. Bell couldn't strike up a conversation even if he wanted to. He still wasn't as strong as Zhen Xingming. Sillin found a place to sit down. There were free drinks and snacks here. Hui Mao squatted on the table in front of Sillin and swayed left and right to the beat. It lifted its paw and nailed a piece of flaky pastry. It ate and watched while commenting in its heart, their dancing skills are not as good as Lycrabe's. What would Zhen Xingming think if he knew that he was being looked down upon by a cat? The dance ended. Belle yelled, "Oh, another one." Jen Xingming glanced at the screaming Belle not far away. He understood what Belle was trying to say all too well. On the surface, he was telling Jen Xingming to keep jumping, but what he really meant was, "If you keep jumping, I'll smash this place down." Jen Xingming let go of the woman's waist and whispered something into the woman's ear. Then, he walked off the dance floor and walked towards Belle. "You're finally here." Jen Xingming punched Belle's shoulder. "Why didn't you contact me earlier? Why didn't you tell me you were coming to the 23rd star region?" Belle punched him in return. "How dare you say that? Didn't I tell Tuo-sen to tell you to contact me on your own?" Belle was usually the busier one. He wouldn't talk to anyone unless it was convenient for him. If Jen Xingming had tried contacting Belle on his own, he would have most likely been ignored. Truth be told, Belle hated being interrupted the most when he was experiencing life. "Don't mention Tuo-sen to me." "Then why didn't I get through to you after that?" Jen Xingming tried to contact Belle more than 30 times, but he only succeeded on the last attempt. The first few attempts were all fruitless. "Oh, so you threw that communicator away and replaced it with another one. Forget it, I'll forgive you this time." Jen Xingming raised his chin. "Let's go somewhere else and have a good chat." Belle called Silen over and said to Jen Xingming, "This is Silen, my new friend." "Oh, that's who's on his shoulder. It's a very smart cat." Hui Mao, who was a little upset at being almost ignored, shook his beard when he heard the word smart. He looked at Jen Xingming proudly. Jen Xingming didn't look at Hui Mao. Instead, he looked at Silen and felt a sense of familiarity. He clearly didn't know Silen, and he couldn't remember anyone who looked similar to Silen either. But why did he feel a sense of familiarity? In fact, Silen felt that Jen Xingming looked familiar as well. Jen Xingming actually looked a lot like Jenya. In Silen's memories, Jenya only looked like an old man, but if Jenya was younger, he would look 60 to 70% similar to Jen Xingming through complex analysis. However, Jenya also said that he had no children. This meant that Jen Xingming's elders had a close relationship with Jenya. However, what puzzled Silen was that the ring didn't react at all in front of Jen Xingming, the real prince of the Jen family. Jenya could only be sent back to the Jen family when the ring resonated with him. If the ring didn't react in front of Jen Xingming, then when and under what circumstances would it react? Belle noticed that both of them were looking at him strangely, so he asked, "Do you two know each other?" Why didn't they look like they were looking at strangers? Silen and Jen Xingming shook their heads at the same time. "No." Seeing that he was being ignored again, Hui Mao whipped Silen impatiently with his tail. Silen scratched Hui Mao's chin in consolation. "All right, let's go." "Where are we going?" Belle nudged the slightly distracted Jen Xingming. Jen Xingming pointed upwards, "Up there." Jen Xingming led Silen and Belle to the top floor of the bar. It was an open-air venue, and the place where Silen and the others were standing was right above the liquid of the glass of wine. The floor was like crystal when they walked in. It felt like they were standing on top of a crystal mine when they looked down. The surrounding walls presented an image that reflected the ambience. Because it was open air, the air circulation was good, and there weren't many people around. Therefore, it wasn't as stuffy as inside the bar. Jen Xingming found an empty table for Belle and Silen to sit down at. He then chose a few drinks and snacks from the electronic screen that popped up. "What do you think? This place isn't bad, right? You should know that not just anyone can come here," Jen Xingming said. Belle looked around and was a little disappointed to find that there weren't any single beauties around. He kicked Jen Xingming, "Hey, what's the name of that beauty you were hugging and dancing with just now?" Jen Xingming looked at him as if he were an idiot and answered, "How would I know?" "Yeah, young Master Xingming never needs to strike up a conversation with a beauty." A voice sounded from behind Jen Xingming. "Dawei?" Belle exclaimed in surprise when he saw the girl walking over from behind Jen Xingming. Dawei was born in a middle-class noble family. She used to be classmates with Belle and Zhen Xingming, but due to her rebellious personality, she didn't go back to school after completing her secondary education. Belle didn't expect to see Dawei here. Belle suddenly remembered something and pointed a finger at the bar. "Is this your bar?" he asked Dawei. "Yeah, not bad, right?" Dawei brought over the drinks and snacks that Zhen Xingming had ordered. "My sincerest apologies for troubling you, Miss Dawei." Zhen Xingming crossed his legs and picked up a nut from the plate. Dawei rolled her eyes at Zhen Xingming. "A freeloader has no right to speak." Pulling over a chair and sitting down, Dawei glanced at Silan before asking Belle, "Aren't you going to introduce us?" "His name is Silan." "Silan, this is Dawei. You can eat here for free if you mention her name in the future," Belle said bluntly. Silan knew that Belle and Zhen Xingming had a good relationship with each other when he saw how rude Dawei was. He also noticed that Dawei was a pretty forthright girl. There was no way she would be so close to Belle and Zhen Xingming otherwise. "We circled around the bottles once and sniffed them. Then, it picked up a bottle and pulled out the cork with one bite. Then, it bent its front paw and grabbed the glass in front of Silan. Then, it bit the neck of the glass and poured the alcohol into the blanket." Zhen Xingming's eyes widened. "This cat sure is smart." Hui Mao shot him a disdainful glance before ignoring them. After filling the glass to the brim, it put the cork back in and crouched down in front of the glass to lick the alcohol. It didn't take long for it to finish. It licked its lips, repeated its actions, filled the glass to the brim, and drank again. The four people at the table watched as the cat drank all 4 bottles of alcohol Dawei brought over as if no one else was around. Zhen Xingming looked at Hui Mao's stomach and then at the 4 empty bottles. "Where did this cat drink all its alcohol?" Silan made an "I don't know" expression. He knew that the cat's stomach was like a bottomless pit. In the past, the cat would hunt for big guys directly when it went out to hunt for food. Compared to that, these 4 bottles of alcohol were really nothing. However, Silan was worried that Hui Mao had never drunk so much alcohol in one go before. Would it go crazy if it got drunk? At the same time, Tuasen received an encrypted message on another planet. It was a coded message from Griffin. After deciphering the message, Tuasen hurriedly contacted some people in the military and the relevant personnel on the planet Silan and the others were on. Right now, Silan was very troubled. Why didn't he notice that the cat was addicted to alcohol before? It was also a picky eater, and the only things it liked were the expensive ones. More and more empty bottles appeared on their table, and they were all brought over by Dawei of her own accord. Every time Hui Mao finished a drink, it would stare at Dawei with its round, watery eyes. Dawei's usually resolute heart immediately softened, and she would bring over more bottles. Zhen Xingming looked at Silan and said, 10 bottles now. It should be noted that the alcohol content of these 10 bottles wasn't low. Forget about whether or not Zhen Xingming himself could fit all 10 bottles, even if he could fit all 10 of them, he would have collapsed on the floor by now. Why did it feel like the cat was getting more and more energetic as it drank? Dawei brought over another 5 bottles and watched excitedly as Hui Mao continued to drink. She didn't help pour the alcohol either. She simply watched as Hui Mao busied himself. She had never seen a cat act like this before. Belle scratched his forehead. Why did it feel like everyone had been reduced to the background? How could the 3 handsome men here not be compared to a cat with gray skin? Ahem, I say, Huru. Before Belle could finish, Hui Mao's body suddenly froze. His paw retracted from the bottle's mouth, shattering it with a crack. He looked up at a certain direction in the sky. What's going on? Belle and the other 2 looked at Silan in confusion. Logically speaking, Silan should know better as the cat's owner, shouldn't he? However, Silan was also looking in that direction with a serious expression on his face. Silan's intuition for danger was clearly higher than Belle and the others. Moreover, the cat was coming for them. Belle, Zhen Xingming, and Dawei also knew what was about to happen when they saw how cautious Silan was. There were a few people protecting Zhen Xingming and Belle from the shadows around them. After all, they were 2 princes, and they couldn't afford to bear the consequences if anything happened to them. That was why there were always people protecting them from the shadows at all times. The people hiding in the shadows were also confused by the situation. They didn't sense anything out of the ordinary, did they? However, when a spaceplane slowly came into view, everyone realized that the people inside this average-sized spaceplane weren't simple at all. The spaceplane didn't use the cover of the night to conceal itself, as if it didn't care about being discovered. It flew a circle in the sky in a grandiose manner before arriving above a skyscraper not far away from the bar. The exit below the spaceplane opened, and 7 figures jumped out and landed on the roof of the skyscraper. The light from the skyscraper's surface and the giant lamppost on the roof illuminated the figures very clearly. Sillin didn't even need a remote device to see them clearly. The people who were secretly protecting Zhen Xingming and Belle felt like their stomachs were churning when they saw them. It wasn't just the people hiding in the shadows. Belle and Zhen Xingming weren't any better off. Their faces were dark and their bodies were tense. Fuck, why are those freaks here? Zhen Xingming cursed. Who are they? Sillin asked. He had a feeling that these people were here for him, but he hadn't come to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire for long. According to Belle, he shouldn't have come into contact with people at the level of AF1 and AF2. Belle gulped and said with a bitter expression, "Those are the freaks from AF1 and AF2 that I told you about." From left to right, that's Soul Suppressor Ling Shi from AF1, Inaf and her brother Puno from AF2, Goryo from AF1, Bi Yao and Zani from AF2, and the Black Panther next to Ling Shi is also from AF1. His name is Panther. Although they didn't want to run into anyone from AF1 and AF2 even if they were beaten to death, Belle and Zhen Xingming had memorized some of their faces since a long time ago so that they wouldn't know how they got screwed if they ran into them in the future. However, they didn't expect to run into so many people from AF1 and AF2 at this time. A single person was enough to take them down, so who would be willing to go all out? If even Soul Suppressor Shi was sent out, then this was no small matter. De Wei had already contacted people to evacuate the bar. If a fight really broke out here, then the legendary AF1 and AF2 people might not even be able to keep this bar alive. At the top of the skyscraper, Ling Shi frowned when she saw the people on the top of the bar. Before coming here, she didn't understand why Griffin had sent out 7 people at once, but now she seemed to understand a little. Griffin once told her that she would understand when she saw Sillin. The black leopard next to Ling Shi wagged its tail and said, "Why do I feel like that kid's eyes look a little like White Knight's?" "Hearing you say that, I think so too," Bi Yao said. "No wonder he looked familiar." "So that's why." Goryo was sitting on the edge of a building with his feet dangling in the air. He didn't seem to mind that he was sitting on the edge of a 100-story building at all. White Knight was a legendary figure in AF1, and Griffin once said that he had a pair of incredibly sharp eyes. When those eyes looked at you, they would give you the illusion that you were the prey. Hunter and prey. Even if the hunter was in the open and the prey was in the dark, when those eyes looked at you, all prey had nowhere to hide. Is this why Teacher Griffin values that kid so much? Elenaf rubbed her fists. Won't we know if we try? Ling Shi took a step forward and stood on the edge of the roof. Half of her foot was exposed, as if she would fall off if she leaned forward a little more. However, the others didn't seem worried at all. Ling Shi clasped her hands together and interlaced her fingers, then placed them by her mouth. As her fingers moved, a piece of music came from there. "Don't listen to that sound," Belle yelled at Sillin. He hurriedly covered his ears as well. Even though they were so far away, the sound was still clear when it reached them. The music whistled through the air like an explosion of life. It was a violent impact that disappeared in an instant, followed by a strong gust of wind that seemed to blow away one's soul. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, so hurried that no one was prepared for it. However, his mind was strained and oppressed in the high density of stagnation. All of a sudden, endless thoughts overlapped and overlapped. The soul that was restrained at the fingertips humbly begged for release. Then, an unstoppable force whistled through the air, then suddenly disappeared without a trace when no one was prepared for it. The sudden calmness and relief made people feel an indescribable sense of confusion, as if their lives were being drained hopelessly. A call drew everyone's consciousness over. It was a call hidden in the wind. The wind and clouds that couldn't breathe swept over, and the darkness seemed to be fading away. It was ethereal and ethereal. Their minds were blank. Some of the people who heard the music froze in their previous positions, but their expressions were blank and hopeful. They were already immersed in their own consciousness. Their senses seemed to be isolated from their consciousness, and they couldn't sense what was happening around them. Soul Suppressor She. The reason why it was called Soul Suppressor She was because the sound seemed to be able to intimidate a person's soul and guide it. It sounded mysterious, but it was actually a kind of superb hypnosis, a natural hypnosis technique. It couldn't be replicated. Even recording the music with a recording device wouldn't be able to achieve such an effect. This was the main reason why Ling Shi was chosen by AF1. Belle and Zhen Xingming's backs were drenched in sweat. It took a lot of energy to resist the music. The music finally stopped, but Belle and Zhen Xingming grew even more nervous. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. What were these people going to do next? The people responsible for protecting Belle and Zhen Xingming in the dark were all experts of the royal family. Although they managed to resist the hypnosis, it wasn't easy. They didn't dare to use their guns carelessly against AF1 and AF2. The conflict would escalate if they did. However, before they figured out AF1 and AF2's goal, everyone had to stay united and observe the situation. It was fine as long as the two princes' safety was guaranteed. Ling Shi didn't move after the music stopped. Neither side made a move. They simply stood there in silence. Ling Shi and the others were analyzing Silin and evaluating Belle and Zhen Xingming's abilities. After all, it was quite impressive that they could resist the hypnotic music. On the other hand, Silin didn't seem to react to the music at all. This puzzled Ling Shi and the others. Zhenya had taught Silin hypnosis since he was young, and Silin had absorbed a lot of other techniques as well. His resistance to hypnosis had grown even stronger after the incident at Sector S's prison. Therefore, it wasn't easy to hypnotize Silin. Belle looked at Zhen Xingming and away. The three of them knew each other since they were young, and they had worked together many times in school. They could read each other's thoughts with a single look. The people from AF1 and AF2 never knew the meaning of courtesy, and they couldn't rely entirely on the people hiding in the dark. How were they supposed to come up with a foolproof plan? Silin sensed the unusual movements around him. He didn't need to worry about Belle and Zhen Xingming's safety. Naturally, there were plenty of people who would protect them. Silin was now certain that the people from AF1 and AF2 were here for him, and the battle was definitely going to break out soon. Right now, the only thing Silin was thinking about was how to fight them. After Ling Shi's music stopped, the surroundings suddenly became a lot quieter. Even the lights looked eerie under the night sky. Hui Mao had been staring at the Black Panther on the rooftop all this time. The panther's eyes were very hostile, and it was looking at him arrogantly with thick mockery and disdain. Disdain? What right did he have to disdain it? Meow meow, why the hell are you showing off, you black thing? The gray cat let out a roar, and the tense atmosphere collapsed just like that. The roar was so loud that the people and the panther on the rooftop could hear it clearly. The Black Panther's ears twitched a little before he looked at the others, especially Puno. He wasn't sure who the black thing, the ugly cat, was referring to. Puno thought, "You're the darkest panther here, and you're looking at me?" Silin put a hand to his forehead. The cat was probably going crazy from the alcohol. Normally, it wouldn't have yelled in such an unfamiliar environment in front of so many strangers without any scruples. It even had profanities in it. Hui Mao leaped from the table to the wall and stood still. He raised his tail and pointed a paw at the Black Panther. "I've been annoyed by you for a long time. Come down and fight me." Silin, Belle, and the others were speechless. The panther's beard trembled, and Goryo burst out laughing. Panther, it's been a long time since I've seen one of my kind look down on you. Please don't insult the word, my kind. It's just a cat, not a panther. They've already issued a challenge. Are we going to accept it? Puno looked at the panther. Of course. Black Panther yelled and ran down the wall of the building. Leave that panther to me. If I don't beat it up, it won't know why cats eat fish. With that, Hui Mao jumped down from the wall. Silen, is Wheeze all right? Belle asked uncertainly. Don't worry about it, Silen replied confidently. On the roof of the skyscraper, Enaf flexed her fists. Let's go too. Let's go. Enaf, Biyao, and Puno all unfurled a hoverboard that was similar to a hoverboard. The front of the board was designed to break the airflow and reduce air resistance. This increased speed, but at the same time, the control requirements of the hoverboard were much higher. Zani didn't unfurl his hoverboard. Instead, he took off his jacket and jumped down. After falling a certain distance, a pair of featherless, bat-like wings suddenly unfurled from his back, making him look like a ghost in the night. Only Ling Shi and Goryo remained on the roof, watching the development below. Chapter 233. In this part of the city, many people had been hypnotized. The people walking on the streets, the people sitting in the restaurants, the mobile stalls floating in the sky, all of them were gone. In addition to the hypnotic effect of Sentinel Spirit Shi, the planetary government also took action, sending some people who were still drifting away from their consciousness away from this area. Soon, there were no other people in the streets around the bar, only flashing lights. However, the planetary government had evacuated some innocent people, but they did not make a move against the main characters here, or rather, they pretended to be deaf and dumb. The Gen family and the Fuvig family had not come out to express their opinions, and they, as small fries, did not want to get involved. Some people in the military were also aware, but they maintained a wait-and-see attitude. The black leopard had the unique elegance of a feline. It was swift and arrogant, and its dark golden pupils reflected a frightening light in the night. Every step it took was like a noble taking a stroll in a grand ceremony, and it was pleasing to the eyes and heart. In comparison, Hui Mao was much more comical. Perhaps it was because he had drunk too much alcohol, but he was a little shaky when he ran. When he slid down a beautiful arc on the side, he even slipped and slid like a child on a slide. Midway, due to his unstable center of gravity, he made a 180-degree turn, and his butt slid forward and landed first. The Black Panther regretted running. Why did he listen to this cat's provocation and run down? This kind of trash wants to fight one-on-one. Not to mention his size, just his unsteady steps alone could send him flying with a single paw. After landing, Hui Mao slowly stood up, turned around, and shook his fur. At this time, the Black Panther that was descending from the skyscraper was already close. With a large leap, its smooth fur revealed a beautiful streamline under the illumination of the lights, but after a bang, the elegance was gone. The Black Panther that was leaping towards Hui Mao was sent flying. Ling Shi and Goryo, who were standing at the top of the skyscraper, raised their eyebrows when they saw this. A cat that could send Panther flying in a single move. It seemed like this was the first time they had seen such a cat. Not to mention cats, even the other exotic beasts of AF1 had not made Panther lose face like this. The Black Panther was originally going to trample the ugly, small, and stupid cat on the ground, but when he really touched it, he found that he was suddenly hit by a strong force. When he came back to his senses, he was already knocked into the air. He adjusted his center of gravity and landed on the ground. Moving his chin, he felt a burning pain, which proved that the blow just now was not an illusion. It was an oversight. The Black Panther re-examined the cat. At this moment, Hui Mao was squatting on the ground, looking at the Black Panther calmly. He flicked his ears and licked his claws, saying, "So weak." The Black Panther roared, and its domineering roar spread out with a vibration wave. Some of the glass products in the nearby shops shattered with a bang. Hui Mao pulled back his ears, raised his head 45 degrees, opened his mouth, and howled. Meow. He didn't have the domineering aura of the Black Panther, but more of an inexplicable strangeness. The moment it heard the cat's meow, the Black Panther's fur stood on end. It didn't feel danger, but terror. It was an absurd and instinctive trembling. Following the cat's meow, a dark zone began to appear with the Black Panther at the center. The electrical circuits were affected, and the power supply system was completely paralyzed. A growing circle of darkness appeared in the colorful night view of the city. All the lighting equipment in the skyscrapers and bars were destroyed, and the place was completely dark. The people who were watching this area from space were shocked, but the display equipment was also starting to show interference. They couldn't see what was happening below them. The city was dark, but that didn't mean that the battle had stopped. The people who came down on hoverboards quickly arrived in front of Sillin and the others. Zani was about to land on the rooftop of the bar when he suddenly appeared 3 steps away from Dewey. He spread his wings wide and said, "My apologies, beautiful lady, but you can't interfere with the battle over there. This is my territory." Belle and Zhen Xingming were both fighting, so she couldn't back down. She was also one of the vanguards when she was in school. A metal rod appeared in Dewey's hand. It split open in the middle and folded in reverse to reveal its true appearance. It was a custom-made butterfly knife. At the same time, Biao stood in front of Belle, Inafu in front of Zhen Xingming, and Sillin in front of Puno. Biao's forte was speed, and he was even faster than Zani's move just now. Belle knew this, so he had to catch Biao's movements as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would be forced into a passive position. Zhen Xingming stared at the seemingly delicate girl in front of him. He knew very well that this was just a facade, and that Inafu was actually a strength type just like Puno. As for that long braid behind her head, one should never think that it was Inafu's blind spot. In reality, dozens of people had died to that braid. As for Puno, he wasn't just strong, his movements weren't as clumsy as they looked. His muscular body was flexible, and even his punches were agile without losing any of their power. His punches weren't flashy at all, and every one of them carried the determination to subdue the enemy in one hit. The Zhen family and the Fuvig family were secretly anxious, but they didn't show up to interfere. Why? Just now, Tuasen had communicated with them and conveyed Griffin's message. AF1 and AF2's targets weren't Zhen Xingming and Belle's group, so they weren't going to kill them. They were only going to stop them. In fact, the situation was very clear. Compared to Zani, Biao, and Inafu, Puno's attacks were much fiercer. The other 3 were mostly defending. The people protecting Zhen Xingming and Belle relaxed a little when they saw this, but they still paid attention to their master's movements at all times just in case. Bang! Puno's punch missed, but a huge hole appeared in the wall half a meter away from his fist. It was a hole created by the aftershock of his punch. Darvi, who was fighting Zani, felt her face twitch. The destruction had finally begun. Zani even had the leisure to look at the other side. He said to Darvi, "This is unavoidable. Think about it. Think about it, my ass. I'm going to get the repair fees this time." Darvi swung her butterfly knife at Zani as if she was venting her anger. Zani curled his lips and nimbly dodged the attack. Sillin dodged the punch head-on, lowered his body, turned his feet inwards, and swung his left arm inwards. They were both simple punches, but Sillin had the advantage in speed. It wasn't too difficult for Sillin to deal with Puno's rainstorm of punches. In fact, he was able to counter quite a few of his punches. Puno wasn't feeling good after taking a few of Sillin's punches, but his attacks didn't slow down at all. It was as if he couldn't feel any pain at all. Sillin had also noticed Puno's abnormality, because every punch he threw was enough to break a few bones in Puno's ears. However, these bones that should have been broken only let out a cracking sound, and then, there was nothing else. It was as if they had never been broken, and did not affect Puno at all. Rapid recovery? No, definitely not. This was different from Guidai Shirsi's short-term recovery. Puno's bones should have been broken, but they didn't break apart after they broke. It was like a broken stick sticking close to the fracture. The cracks were still there, but it didn't look like they were broken. However, even if it didn't look like it was broken, it shouldn't be as unaffected as Puno was. No, it was still affected. The muscle activity at the broken bones was 0.001 seconds slower than before. It was still due to his body's peculiarity. Puno still needed to repair his bones after this. As for the 0.001 seconds Puno was slower, Sillin seized this momentary difference and gave Puno a few more punches. Biao grinned at Belle and sent a lightning-fast kick towards Belle's abdomen. The people in the shadows watched their prince roll on the ground while holding his stomach. They hesitated for a moment but didn't show up in the end. They were all experts, so they could tell that the kick had only temporarily incapacitated Belle and didn't cause any life-threatening injuries. However, if they showed up, they would probably be called over by Belle to fight against AF1 and AF2. Therefore, when they thought of what Tuosun had said before, they decided not to show themselves for now. The Fire Eagle King's order was to ensure Belle's safety anyway. As long as Belle's life wasn't in danger, the Fire Eagle King was willing to let Belle suffer a little. After kicking Belle, Biao went over to help Puno against Sillin. Since Puno couldn't keep up with Sillin's speed, Biao would do it. One was good at speed, the other was good at strength, and the two worked well together. This undoubtedly put a lot of pressure on Sillin. Biao specifically took advantage of the gaps between Sillin and Puno to interfere with Sillin from tricky angles. It was often said that 2 fists were no match for 4 hands, but strangely enough, Sillin wasn't hurt by Biao or Puno even though he didn't retaliate as much against Puno as Biao. Biao and Puno grew more and more apprehensive as they fought. Before, they thought Sillin was just a little faster, but now that Biao was moving faster and faster, Sillin seemed to be working with him to increase his speed. The overlapping shadows of fists, palms, and kicks, along with the darkness of the night, made it harder and harder for them to catch up. All they could hear was the sound of collisions and the occasional sound of walls being smashed through. Bang! Biao was kicked out by Sillin in a moment of carelessness, and he smashed into the surrounding walls. The wall behind him shattered with a resounding sound, but the good thing was that Biao managed to grab onto a corner of the shattered wall when the wall shattered, flipped himself over and rolled a few times on the ground. Rubbing his stomach, Biao turned around to see Belle sitting on the ground with a grin on his face. Belle's eyes seemed to be saying, "Retribution has come, kid." The corner of Biao's eye twitched as he looked in the direction of the skyscraper. He didn't ask Anaf and Zani to help. After what had happened just now, Biao also understood that Sillin's speed was too great. Even if Anaf and Zani went up, they would probably be the same as him in no time. So he looked at Goryo, who was standing on the roof of the skyscraper. Without the lights, the building was completely dark. On the roof, Lingxi looked at Biao, who had been kicked out of the fighting circle, and said, "You can indeed make your move." Goryo chuckled and took out a box. Inside the box were a few parts and a few strangely shaped bullets. As Goryo moved his fingers, the parts were assembled one by one, and soon, a gun was assembled in Goryo's hands. It looked very strange. According to the parts, this gun used bullets, but unlike other guns, this gun's barrel was very short, so short that it looked a little deformed. Goryo picked out a bullet from the box. There were a few holes on the bullet and some strange whorls on it. After loading it, the bullet could still be seen at the mouth of the barrel. After loading it, Goryo put on his glasses. Through the glasses, he could see what was happening below, find the target, and use the data on his eyes to calculate and deduce in his mind. He pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was very soft. The moment the muzzle locked onto him, Sillin sensed it. Taking advantage of Puno's punch, Sillin quickly retreated. Pa! The bullet grazed Sillin's shoulder and shot into the crystal-like floor. A spider web of cracks instantly appeared on the floor. Puno didn't restrain himself just because someone was shooting at him. Instead, he attacked even more fiercely, as if he was going to fight to the death. Puno knew Goryo too well and believed in Goryo's ability. Goryo wouldn't hurt him, and Goryo's gun would never accidentally hurt him. The first shot was just a test to test Silen's reaction. There was still the second and third shot. Each shot would be different and more difficult to dodge. What Puno needed to do now was to try his best to interfere with Silen and affect Silen's judgment so that he couldn't pose a threat to Goryo, who was shooting over there. Goryo's first shot was aimed at Silen's right shoulder, but Silen dodged it. The bullet grazed the clothes on his right shoulder, and the skin on his right shoulder could still feel the burn caused by the friction between the bullet and the air as it flew at high speed. This kind of bullet seemed to burn the air in its trajectory. There were burn marks on Silen's shoulder, but this wound wasn't a straight line. Instead, it was curved, an irregular arc. Just now, Silen felt that something was wrong. Through his keen hearing and accurate judgment and calculation ability, Silen understood that the bullet's trajectory was not a straight line, but an arc. However, this arc was different from an arc design. Instead, it was a change in trajectory caused by the shape of the bullet itself during its flight. In other words, as long as the bullet was still flying in the air, its trajectory would change. It was reasonable to say that it was difficult to control the accuracy of such a change in trajectory. However, for some people, it was a big killer weapon. Whether it was a straight shot or an arc design, as long as one understood and had the ability, they would be able to make the most timely and accurate dodging. However, this kind of bullet that was constantly changing its trajectory made it impossible for the target to judge which direction to dodge to at that moment. Of course, the person who dared to use this kind of bullet must also be someone with extraordinary calculation ability. He could calculate the bullet's trajectory based on the environmental conditions at the time, the distance from the target, the changes in air pressure, temperature, and airflow, etc. In their eyes, the target was just moving in different calculated trajectories. When the time was right, the shooter would shoot. Therefore, Silen also had to face a person with extraordinary calculation ability. While dealing with Puno's attack, Silen paid attention to the person on the roof. His heart skipped a beat. Silen knew that the second shot was coming. Compared with the first shot, the trajectory of this bullet had clearly changed again. It was faster than the previous one, but the changes in the trajectory were also more complicated. Pa! The bullet passed through the gap between Silen's fingers and hit the ground. If Silen had still clenched his fist just now, his entire fist would probably have been crippled. However, at that moment, Silen opened his palm and the bullet passed through the gap between the middle and ring fingers of his left hand. Chapter 234. Ignoring the burn on his finger, Silen avoided Puno's elbow strike and punched the side of Puno's waist. He succeeded in one hit, but Silen did not take the opportunity to launch a combo. Instead, he leaped back, and the third bullet was about to arrive. The second bullet was obviously more difficult to grasp than the first one, and one could imagine how difficult the third one would be. Silen needed time to analyze the third bullet. Even if it was only a 10,000th of a second more, it would increase the success rate of the analysis. Ling Shi, who was standing on the roof, looked at Silen. She did not expect Goryo's second bullet to miss, and what she did not expect even more was that Silen's finger was only slightly burned. It was just an instantaneous burn from the bullet's high temperature. How was that possible? According to Ling Shi's understanding of the bullet used by Goryo, this bullet did not only bring about instantaneous high temperature, but also a powerful airflow compression impact. Purgatory Thunder Snake was the name of this bullet. After the bullet was fired, it had the speed of lightning and the instantaneous change of trajectory of lightning. It was also like a snake biting its prey. The snake would not blink, and it would not give the target even a blink of an eye to escape. Trajectory change, instantaneous high temperature, and high pressure impact. It was not easy to dodge, and the secondary destructive force was not something that ordinary people could withstand. Therefore, even if it passed through the gaps between Silen's fingers, it should not only bring about a burn to Silen. According to Ling Shi's estimation, even if it did not break his fingers, a piece of flesh would be cut off by the airflow. But that was not the case. It seemed that Silen's physical strength was not inferior to Puno's. While Ling Shi was analyzing Silen, Goryo fired his third bullet. When this bullet was fired, the muzzle was not aimed at Silen, but it was indeed locked onto Silen. Silen could clearly feel it. In fact, Goryo did not think that he would use this bullet on Silen here. After the second shot, Goryo replaced the bullet he had originally planned and used this one. Because if he had used the bullet he had originally planned, there was a 60% chance that it would have missed. At most, it would have given Silen another burn wound. Goryo was very confident in this bullet. Even Teacher Griffin and the others wouldn't be able to dodge it. Moreover, this bullet's penetrative ability was quite strong. It could penetrate an entire spaceship. The special material and the special shooting made Goryo very confident in this bullet. This was the true Purgatory Thunder Snake. The first two Purgatory Thunder Snake bullets could only be called Thunder Snakes, but this one was a Purgatory Thunder Snake bullet. If Griffin knew that Goryo had used a Purgatory Thunder Snake on Silen, he wondered if she would flip out. When the Purgatory Thunder Snakes appeared, they would either die or be heavily injured. At least Griffin didn't intend to seriously injure Silen. Time to see blood. Gal thought faintly. The bullet streaked across the distance between the two buildings at high speed, changing its trajectory and shooting at Silen. At the same time, Puno also attacked Silen again. Unavoidable, unavoidable. Golder looked down with a smile. Clang! The sparks produced by the friction of metal were particularly conspicuous in the dark, like a snake colliding with a hard shield at high speed. Goryo's smile froze. Puno's attack was also forcibly stopped. That clang had already caused the others to stop and pay attention to Celine's side. The slender blade wasn't conspicuous in the dark. Without the illumination of the lights, the dim starlight plated the blade with a layer of cold light, bringing an indelible shock to those who saw this scene. At that moment, it was like a sharp claw had suddenly reached out from the void and blocked the Purgatory Thunder Snake bullet. The blade. It was Osculo's blade. It had been baptized by the blood of countless people and had accompanied a star-level hunter on countless battlefields. It was this blade that seemed to make the surrounding temperatures suddenly drop to a freezing point. Bell was originally prepared to swear and accuse these people of using guns, but he held back all of his words. A murderous aura that made one's hair stand on end. Puno seemed to hear the wailing of countless wronged souls. In theory, the bullet had been aimed at Silen's right shoulder, but it had been blocked by the blade on its way over. Holding his blade, Silen glanced at Puno, whose entire body was tensed and stopped a meter away from the horizontal blade. Suddenly, the shadow of his hand flashed, and the blade's position had already changed. He held it upside down and placed it beside him. Clang! Sparks flew. The fourth shot. Puno's throat was dry, and he swallowed a few times. 4 shots. Goryo hadn't even hit a single target. After knowing Goryo for so many years and working together for so long, this was the first time he had seen Goryo's 4 shots fail. Zani's night vision was the best among them. He could clearly see the blade in Silen's hand. There were no marks on the blade, and it had blocked 2 shots. The sparks from the friction of metal didn't come from this blade at all, but from the so-called Purgatory Thunder Snake that could pierce through a spacecraft. After the 4th shot, Goryo put away the gun, dismantled it, and put it back in the box. He understood very well that there was no need for Silen to shoot again. The Purgatory Thunder Snake wasn't invincible. To be able to calculate the trajectory of the Purgatory Thunder Snake to such an accurate degree was indeed admirable. Goryo was able to predict the trajectory of the bullet because of his understanding of the Purgatory Thunder Snake, but what about Silen? Silen had deduced the bullet's shape and structure based on the bullet's initial flight trajectory, and then deduced the subsequent trajectory changes. If it was a calculation problem in a class, then there were countless people in AF1 who could solve it. However, this was an actual battle, and there was only a short moment left for people to think. What was this person's brain made of? Was it a human computer? Goryo had always thought that his brain was good, and his rapid calculation ability was strong, but compared to Sillin, it was really not up to standard. After putting away the box, Goryo made a helpless gesture toward Ling Shi. This guy is too strong. No wonder Teacher Griffin sees him in a different light. Seeing that Goryo had put away his knife, Puno also did the same. He pressed a few parts of his body that had been hit by Sillin. This time, his injuries seemed to be a bit more serious. As Puno rubbed his wounds, the cracked bones inside his body slowly began to heal. Belle and Jen Xingming relaxed when they saw that these people were showing signs of stopping. However, when they saw a badge accidentally fall out of Puno's wound while he was rubbing it, they became nervous again. Puno hurriedly picked up the badge, blew on it, and wiped it. Then, he smiled innocently at everyone and put it away like it was a treasure. Zani, Bi Yao, and the others didn't react much to Puno's badge. They had one of their own, and it was the capital of their arrogance. Even if they didn't have a military rank, the soldiers would still treat them with respect. Through the night vision on her cornea, Davi also saw the pattern on the badge. The hand holding the butterfly knife trembled a little. Wing. Wing was a special department of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The emblem of Wing was a pair of wings. At the center of the emblem was the national emblem of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. There was a pair of wings on each side of the emblem. One wing had the emblem of the Imperial Guard, and the other had the emblem of the Imperial Guard. Although Wing's emblem had the emblem of the two great armies of the Empire, they were independent of the two great armies. Wing had a lot of authority, and could accept orders directly from the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor. In other words, the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor was their ultimate leader. They were also the only department that the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor had granted them the right to kill nobles directly. There were plenty of nobles who had broken the laws of the Empire and been beaten by Wing, and many of them had been killed. That was why the nobles' first reaction when they saw Wing was to feel guilty. Who didn't have a pile of shit on their butt? In Belle and Jen Xingming's eyes, these people were just AF1 and AF2 students. At most, they would feel a little uncomfortable, but they didn't think that they would cause too much trouble. But now, they weren't so sure anymore. Who knew what kind of orders these people had received? What if they were accidentally injured or killed in the end? It wasn't that Belle and Jen Xingming were cowards. As direct descendants of the royal family, they shouldn't be so afraid of Wing's people. But Belle and Jen Xingming had never been obedient since they were young. They had done what they should and shouldn't have done. It would have been fine if their father was here to support them, but without the old man's support, they were clearly lacking in authority. When did Wing recruit these bastards? Why hadn't they heard anything at all? Belle and Jen Xingming couldn't be blamed for not knowing. If they were still in the imperial capital, they would have found out with a little investigation. But the problem was that they had left the imperial capital for a while now, so they didn't know what was going on in AF1 and AF2. Zani was very cocky. The wings on his back were flapping loudly to show off his existence. Belle and Jen Xingming, the two princes of the royal family, were intimidated by him. Ahem, Puno, put your badge away. Of course, it was an accident. Puno had no intention of showing off. He put away his badge and started massaging his wound again. Zani glanced at the guarded Belle and the others and was about to show off again when he noticed Sillin's gaze. He turned to look at Sillin. What are you looking at, kid? I know I'm handsome, but you've never seen a man with wings before, have you? It can't be helped. Talent always attracts jealousy. Bi Yao and Inaf were used to Zani's behavior a long time ago. They didn't even bother to roll their eyes at Sillin. Sillin, was it? Our boss has a message for you. Sillin moved before Bi Yao could finish his sentence. Although Puno was rubbing the wounds on his body, he was also paying attention to Sillin's movements at all times. At this time, he saw that Sillin had suddenly moved, and he even had the momentum to openly swing his blade. Moreover, the target of the swing was none other than the smug Zani. Puno instantly pushed himself to the limit and smashed a large hole in the ground with his legs. He sprinted towards Silen. Biao also kicked at Silen at top speed. Judging from the group situation, Silen was the closest to Punori, and Biao was slightly further away. However, neither of them could compare to Silen's distance to Zani's. Silen was obviously the furthest away, but he was able to dodge Puno's fist, Biao's kick, parry Anaf's fist, and stab Zani in the stomach. Zani was still thinking about how to show off in front of these two famous members of the royal family, but he suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. But before he could react, he felt a chill in his abdomen, and a huge chill swept through his entire body. Zani regretted his carelessness. He had failed miserably in an easy task. For a moment, Zani felt that he had experienced the feeling of death. Ling Shi and Goryo, who were standing on top of a tall building, didn't expect Silen to be so daring either. Belle, the Zhen family, and the Fuvig family members who were watching from the shadows felt like their hair was about to explode when they saw this scene. Belle and Zhen Xingming really wanted to knock themselves out on the ground. Stabbing a member of Wing. Other than those who didn't care about their lives, only their superiors would listen to them. But Silen didn't look like someone who didn't care about his life, and he definitely wasn't a member of Wing. Why would he stab Zani? Although Zani's mouth was as big as Bart's, he couldn't just stab Zani directly. Belle looked at Zhen Xingming. It's over. Silen definitely doesn't know about Wing, or he wouldn't dare stab Zani. What do we do? What do we do? Motherfucker, bastard. Puno's body swelled and doubled in size. Anaf and Biao were different from before as well. They looked like they were ready to fight to the death. Ling Shi and Goryo flew down on a fan-shaped flying board. Goryo was holding two guns in his hands, two short-barreled guns similar to the ones from before. Wait! Ling Shi stopped them. Zani's fine. Silen put away his blade. It still wasn't stained with a single drop of blood. He frowned at Zani. Silen was far more sensitive to those things than anyone else present. In fact, he was even more sensitive than Zani himself. But he drew his knife at Zani. This is unforgivable. Puno and Biao looked like they were about to stop. Stop! Zani shouted. Puno and Biao finally stopped attacking when they heard Zani's words. They looked at Zani in confusion, not understanding why he was doing this. Zani took a deep breath with some difficulty and exhaled slowly. It took him quite a bit of effort to recover from the shock just now, and he waved his hand at the healing potion Anaf passed to him to indicate that he didn't need it. Belle had covered his face with his hands when he saw that the battle was about to begin, but his eyes were still peeking through the gaps between his fingers. At first, he was complaining that the people hiding in the shadows didn't come out to help, but when he saw that things weren't going the way he expected, he moved his hands away and openly observed the situation. Under everyone's confused gazes, Zani raised his hand and revealed 5 fingernails that were even longer than his fingers. Then, Zani put his hand into the wound that Silen had just stabbed him. Zani used his long fingernails to dig into the wound until they completely disappeared. Belle and Zhen Xingming subconsciously touched their abdomens and shivered when they saw this. It must be very painful. When Zani's fingernails reappeared, they were holding a black object about the size of a quail egg. An insect? Zani twisted his fingers and crushed the object into pieces when he saw it. Then, he raised his head and let out a long scream that didn't sound like a human's. Following this sharp scream, Zani's originally sturdy body quickly became thin, but his arms were stretched out. Pop! Pop! 2 more pairs of wings unfurled behind Zani's back, each longer than the last. 2 long, sharp teeth protruded out of his mouth. His silhouette under the hazy starlight looked quite sinister at first glance, like a demon from a fairy tale. Silen could feel that Zani had become lighter. No, his bones had become lighter. They were probably hollow bones that allowed him to move faster in the air. This was the real Zani. In comparison, the previous Zani looked like he was playing with a child. Zani let out another scream after he became like this. This time, he didn't change as much as before, but there were some obvious protrusions moving around his body. However, these protrusions moved from Zani's body to the 3 pairs of wings as if they were threatened. When all the protrusions had moved to the 3 pairs of wings, Zani let out a third scream. The 3 pairs of wings shook violently, and the skin around the protrusions broke open, shaking out the things inside. Pop, pop. The shaking of the wings caused something similar to the black object that Zani had crushed to fall to the ground. Insects? Could it be? Yao exclaimed in surprise. He took out a knife and poked one up for a closer look. These little insects that had fallen to the ground were already close to death because of Zani. They all died in a short while. After shaking out all the insects in his body, Zani returned to his original appearance. This time, he retracted all his wings. Zani panted as he cursed, "Fuck, I miscalculated. I've failed so many times." He'd flipped a few times already. These things were definitely caused by the previous mission. Seeing Zani like this, Puno and the others hurriedly checked themselves. Although they couldn't find any insects in their bodies, they were still a bit worried. After seeing Zani's condition, they felt some lingering fear. Yinav took out a bag and collected the insects, preparing to take them back for identification. Parasites? Ling Shi looked at the dead insects on the ground, then turned to Silan. Now, everyone understood that Silan's previous stab had killed one of the parasites in Zani's abdomen, but how did Silan know that Zani had these things in his body? And how did he stab it so accurately? How did you know that there were parasites in Zani's body? Ling Shi asked. Silan looked at them. Do you guys always speak in such a high and mighty tone? Silan saying that he didn't feel anything about being attacked for no reason was pure nonsense. Ling Shi paused, and her tone softened. We're very sorry, but we won't apologize for what happened before. We were just following orders. Still, we thank you for what you did to Zani. Hey, you, Silan, right? Thanks. Zani had expended too much energy just now, so he sat down on the ground and said to Silan. No need to thank me. Even if I didn't use my blade, you would have been able to endure it. It was just that it would have been terrible. Everyone knew this. Yao was about to say something when Ling Shi stopped him. She took out a card and handed it to Silan. This is what our superior, Teacher Griffin, asked us to give you. As for how you treat it in the future, we won't interfere. Silan took the card and looked at it, but he didn't understand what it was. Belle and Zhen Xingming had grown bolder by now and moved closer to take a look. Holy shit! You people from AF1 have gone too far. I've never seen people poach people like this. Belle's arrogance returned as he pointed at Ling Shi and the others. AF1's recommendation card. Zhen Xingming looked left and right before patting Silan's shoulder. Brother, you're in luck. Someone recommended you to AF1. Silan finally understood the card's use. This meant that he would be able to enter AF1 if he brought this card with him during the next recruitment. Zhen Xingming continued, you don't know yet, do you, Silan? The people in AF1 can only enter through recommendation. That bastard Tuo-sen. Belle interrupted Zhen Xingming with a loud roar. It must have been that bastard Tuo-sen who leaked the information, that piece of trash. I knew he wasn't reliable. Okay, we have to go too. As for this matter, if you have any questions, you can ask Teacher Griffin directly, said Ling Shi. They had done what Griffin wanted them to do, and they still had a mission to complete. They couldn't stay here for too long. Plus, they had to investigate the parasites and seal off the place first. Funo and the others suddenly felt that something was wrong when Ling Shi said they were leaving. It was as if one of them was missing. While they were thinking, they heard a noise coming from the edge of the wall. 2 cat paws rested on the edge of the wall before a cat's head popped out. The cat seemed to be biting something in its mouth. Hui Mao looked very spirited and unharmed. It was only after they jumped up that they realized that Hui Mao was biting the Black Panther's tail. He had dragged the Black Panther up by its tail. It looked like he had done it effortlessly. The surroundings lit up again. The flickering lampposts and the surrounding projections illuminated the place. However, it probably wouldn't be as noisy as it used to be tonight because the planetary government had already sent people to evacuate the hypnotized people here. As for the Black Panther that Hui Mao had dragged up, it looked very weak. Its body was obviously swollen, and it lay there limply. It raised its eyelids to look at Ling Shi and the others before hugging its head with its paws. It wanted nothing more than to find a hole to hide in. Shameful, too shameful. He actually lost to an ugly cat. After Hui Mao jumped up, he looked at the people around him and tossed the Black Panther on the ground. He then walked up to Dewey as if there was no one else around. Do you have any more alcohol? I'm thirsty. Belle really wanted to worship it. This cat was just too amazing. Not only did it beat the Black Panther into this state, but it could also drink so much. Not only was it so good at drinking, it even ignored the people from Wing. As expected, like pet, like master. Dewey looked at the people around her and took a step back, then another. Seeing that there was no reaction, she left to look for alcohol for Hui Mao. Hui Mao saw that Dewey had gone to look for alcohol, so he turned around and ran to Silin. He climbed up to Silin's shoulder with practiced ease. What's that in your hand? The invitation card attached. Silin handed the card to Hui Mao for him to take a closer look. Attached? Is it the first advanced education school of the RAS that Belle mentioned? Yes. Hui Mao looked at the card, then at the people around the Black Panther who were feeding it medicine and inspecting it. Just like that panther. Indeed. No. Hui Mao wagged his tail confidently. Too weak. What a waste of time. The people around him, this cat was too cocky. Hui Mao pushed the card away with his paw and yawned, looking like he didn't want to talk to them anymore. Zani couldn't stand it anymore. You can't say that. We've all been conserving our strength. The Black Panther raised its paws and covered its ears. It had used its full strength, but it was suppressed before it could show its power. Seeing the Black Panther like this, Ling Shi called out to Zani. Let's go. We still have a mission. Puno followed Ling Shi and the others for a few steps before running back to stand in front of Silin. I really don't have that thing on me. Without waiting for Silin to speak, Hui Mao said without opening his eyes, Are you talking about the bug? No. Puno looked at Hui Mao, then at Silin. It was only when he saw Silin nod that he happily caught up to Ling Shi and the others. After Ling Shi and the others had left, Hui Mao urged Silin to find a place to eat. Hey, wait for me. Belle chased after him while cursing into his communicator. Why didn't you say this earlier? What's the point? I'm not going back. I don't want to listen to you. After ending the call, Belle turned around and called out to Zhen Xingming who was still standing in place, Let's go. Got it. Zhen Xingming answered, but he was a little confused as he watched Silin's back. Zhen Xingming had felt a very familiar feeling when Silin blocked the bullet with his blade, and it was the same feeling when Silin put his blade away. It was very strange. Silin was a mystery. If he was a normal person and didn't live a good life, then why would he have a subspace container? Although subspace technology was developing very quickly in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, most people who owned subspace containers were nobles and wealthy merchants. Why would Silin own a subspace container with his circumstances? Moreover, Silin's blade wasn't ordinary either. Could he be an illegitimate child of some family? The more Zhen Xingming thought about it, the more likely it seemed. On the other side, Ling Shi and the others were analyzing Silin after they had boarded the spaceplane and left the planet. There's no doubt that Silin is much stronger than his peers. Even some of the people from AF1 and AF2 might not be able to beat him in a head-on fight, Biao said. But why hasn't anyone discovered him yet? Teacher Griffin had a group of people who were specifically responsible for finding people like them. Zani crossed his legs. Say, who do you think would win if White Knight and Scylla were to fight? Of course it would be White Knight. It's not like you don't know how strong White Knight is, Inafu said affirmatively. Zani shook his finger. Don't blindly worship someone. You need to analyze objectively. Goryo didn't say anything. He didn't know who would win either. Seeing Zani and Inafu arguing, Bia asked Ling Shi, what do you think, Ling Shi? You know your brother better than we do, don't you? White Knight was Ling Shi's older brother. They were discovered and brought to AF1 together. Ling Shi shook her head. Scylla is a very well-hidden person. No one said anything for a while. Puno scratched his head and didn't know what to say. In order to change the topic, he kicked the black panther that was playing dead next to him. Panther, is that cat really that strong? Panther looked pained. I doubt it's a cat. I can't scratch its skin at all. Also. Panther panted heavily. Is that the strength of a cat? Not even King Kong is as strong as it. King Kong was a 10-meter tall gorilla, baby gorilla. It was still in its infancy. Chapter 235. Belle and Zhen Xingming didn't care how Ling Shi and the others discussed the matter after they left. They finally relaxed after the tension had passed, and their playboy demeanor quickly returned. The planetary government continued to play dumb as if nothing had happened. In reality, they did want to selectively lose their memories. After all, they couldn't afford to offend either Wing or the princes of the two royal families, so they might as well forget about them. De Wei had already ordered her people to repair the damaged parts of the bar. Belle and Zhen Xingming were the ones who paid for it, so the two princes didn't mind the small amount of money. Will you join AF1, Scylla? Belle and Zhen Xingming looked at Scylla. They were very curious about this. Scylla shook his head. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. There were too many variables at the moment, and he wasn't familiar with this place yet. Jenya's incident also puzzled him. It wasn't hard to bring Jenya back to the Zhen family, but what did Jenya mean when he said that he could only go home when his ring reacts? If you can make it through, you will definitely learn a lot of things after joining AF1. You should know that AF1's teachers are all famous people of the Empire. Other than the people from the RAS, there are also famous generals of the Empire, some retired generals and old politicians. Zhen Xingming really hoped that Scylla could join AF1. Belle and Zhen Xingming felt awkward every time they talked about AF1, but they had always admired them from the bottom of their hearts. There were very few royals who could join AF1, and those who did were all the focus of the royal family's training. They were people who had been carefully taken care of by generations of the royal family. Even the two sons of the current king couldn't compare to their influence in the royal family. Unfortunately, Belle and Zhen Xingming didn't have the talent or the ability to endure the hardship. If Scylla went to AF1, he could brag a little, I have a good friend in AF1 too. Belle didn't say anything. He had a feeling that Scylla would either be lured into joining the army, or someone else would take advantage of the situation and steal him away. If I go in now, the people of my age should be much younger than me, right? After all, as you said, the people there are all geniuses, Scylla said. Zhen Xingming waved a hand and explained, that's not necessarily the case. The age range inside AF1 is too broad, and that place doesn't care about age at all. It doesn't even care about race. Didn't you see how cocky that black leopard was? Moreover, if you were to enter, you might not necessarily start from the very beginning. AF1 didn't have a fixed grade level. They would arrange the curriculum based on the admission test. Most of the time, the attached school doesn't look like a school, but more like a base to cultivate special talents. In that case, Scylla did have some sectors. If he could go there and learn new knowledge, he would definitely benefit greatly. Scylla thinks for a moment, then asked, what's up with the wings you mentioned before? Belle and Zhen Xingming explained Wing's situation to Sillin in detail so that Sillin would pay more attention to anyone who saw Wing in the future. Belle and Zhen Xingming's fathers weren't afraid of Wing, but they were. It couldn't be helped. They had done too many shameful things, so they couldn't help but feel guilty whenever they saw them. The reason Wing was founded was because of the extravagance of the nobles. Wing was the eyes and ears of the mist Bodhisattva Emperor. When Wing was around, the nobles were a lot more restrained. It was to supervise the nobles. Therefore, even though the nobles had special privileges, they couldn't go too far. It would be terrible if they were caught. Alright, let's change the topic. My stomach hurts when I talk about this, Belle said while shaking off the cold air around him. Alright, I do have something to tell you. Hee, Big Bro bought a new car. Zhen Xingming looked spirited as he slapped the table and boasted, that's Whirlwind's new tripod super flying car series. There are only 5 of them out now, and this Prince's Ride is one of them. Whirlwind was a famous brand among flying cars. It was one of the most unique super flying car manufacturers in the empire. It was famous for its low-key luxury and belonged to the Sizer family. It was one of the top families among the tripod flying cars, and many of its models could be transformed, restrained, and flashy. It was loved by the nobles and was the dream of the flying car race. Belle said sourly while listening to Zhen Xingming's drawn-out boasting, what's the point of just talking? Bring it out and let us see what Whirlwind's latest super flying car model looks like. Belle could have gotten his hands on one if he didn't want to experience life. The problem was that he had already missed the opportunity. De Wei shot a sideways glance at the smug Zhen Xingming and shook her head. What a spendthrift. Sillin himself wanted to see what the legendary super flying car looked like. However, a strange expression appeared on Sillin and Belle's faces when they saw the car that made Zhen Xingming's tail stick up in the air. It was because it was one of the models that Fleeka and the others had been researching. Belle's sour mood immediately brightened up. His grin was so wide that it almost reached his ears. What was I thinking? I didn't know it was something we could play with. It was Belle's turn to be smug this time. You're just jealous. Why the hell would you play with a new car? Zhen Xingming said with a, I knew you were lying, expression. TSK, why would I lie to you? Belle jumped into the car with practiced ease and fiddled with a series of settings on the control panel. The flying car changed its form according to the settings, and Belle explained to Zhen Xingming while driving. He was able to explain in detail many of the settings that Zhen Xingming didn't have time to figure out yet. Fuck, how did you know? Zhen Xingming grabbed Belle's neck and shook it hard. Belle kicked Zhen Xingming away and rubbed his neck. Then, he raised his chin proudly and said, I was there when that fatty Fleeka was designing the flying car. Come to think of it, I even had a hand in the creation of this car. Sillin, I think that fatty should give each of us a car when we run into him. Sillin shot a glance at Belle when he heard this, but he didn't say anything. Out of respect, he didn't tear down Belle's act. Under Zhen Xingming's pressure, Belle explained the whole story briefly. However, he made sure to beautify himself a little and reduce Sillin's presence by a lot. He had to prevent the Zhen family from poaching Sillin. Zhen Xingming rubbed his chin and looked at Sillin. When are you guys going back? I'll go with you and see where this car came from. Let's go tomorrow. Belle had no objections to Sillin's decision. He could do anything he wanted right now, but he didn't want to go back to school. Belle was even more reluctant to return to the imperial capital now that Zhen Xingming had joined them. The next day, the trio left Old Man Chang's planet on Belle's flying car. Sillin bought some things for Old Man Chang's triplets and a high-end electronic board and microcomputer for Chang Xiaowu. Zhen Xingming and Belle bought a lot of things as well when they saw Sillin, especially children's toys. It was easy to win people's hearts and make a good impression on them. De Wei even gave Hui Mao a dozen or so bottles of alcohol and a huge bag of fish biscuits before they left. Hui Mao was so happy that he was in high spirits even when he returned to the planet. They took a spaceplane that was a little more inconspicuous. The main reason was that there was a warehouse on the spaceplane that made it convenient to store Zhen Xingming's flying car. Inside the shop, Old Man Chang was calculating the income from the parts he had sold over the past few days. This place was a lot more relaxed than the maintenance street outside the city. The living standards of the people in the city were higher, and the prices of the things sold were much higher as well. All in all, the family's living conditions were better, and they were a lot more relaxed. The knot in Old Man Chang's heart had been removed after Chang Xiaowu's illness was cured. The triplets were helping to repack the parts, but they would grab a handful of biscuits every once in a while. It looked like the three of them had grown a lot fatter. Just as Old Man Chang was calculating how much goods he should buy, a commotion suddenly broke out at the entrance. A flying car had stopped in front of the shop. Although the flying car didn't look flashy, it was actually very steady. It didn't stand out even among the other cars, and it gave off a very comfortable feeling. It wasn't eye-catching at all, but it was enough to catch the attention of anyone who saw it. What caused the commotion, however, was the brand at the front of the car. Old Man Chang had once dreamed of driving a car of this brand when he was younger. Who in their line of work wouldn't like a car of this brand? Whirlwind was a very high-end brand. Although this was the city, the center of the planet's wealth, it was extremely rare to see someone driving a Whirlwind. Old Man Chang had seen one once when he was younger, but that was all. He hadn't seen it again after that. He didn't expect to see one today. The car door opened, and a person walked out. He looked quite young and handsome. Moreover, he walked straight into the shop. Unlike the arrogance of some aristocratic children, this person looked very easygoing, and the smile on his face was very friendly, giving people a good impression of him at first glance. However, from the way he dressed and behaved, Old Man Chang could tell that this person was definitely an upper-class gentleman. Old Man Chang was a little nervous. He didn't know how to react when encountering such a person. After all, the gap between the two of them was too big. If the other party was an arrogant and despotic rich kid, Old Man Chang would know how to treat him. However, it just so happened that the person in front of him was like this, which put Old Man Chang in a difficult position. This kind of person was born to be looked up to. Even though he appeared to be easygoing, Old Man Chang still felt nervous. At the end of the day, Old Man Chang felt inferior and embarrassed to face such a person. Although there was a service robot, Old Man Chang still went up to greet him personally. "Excuse me, what do you need?" Old Man Chang asked carefully. The person smiled warmly. "Don't be nervous. I'm just looking around." "It's because you're looking around that I'm nervous." Old Man Chang thought to himself. As if reading Old Man Chang's mind, the person didn't say anything and looked at the parts on display. "I can see that you're very familiar with the structure of a flying car," the person said. "These parts are all arranged according to a specific construction order." At the mention of these things, Old Man Chang's nervousness lessened a little. As the person asked some maintenance questions, Old Man Chang's nervousness also slowly eased, and he answered seriously. Old Man Chang felt that this kind of person was quite good. Even if he didn't buy the parts, he couldn't be annoyed. Fortunately, the person sat on the chair that the service robot had brought over and chatted with Old Man Chang. He took a cup of water and moistened his eyes. Old Man Chang couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This was the upper class. Elegant, truly elegant. Sitting there, he looked like a painting. Even the act of drinking tea was so beautiful. While the two were talking, there was a whoosh, and another flying car stopped in front of the shop. However, this car was much more flashy, and what made the surrounding people go crazy was that it was another Whirlwind. What kind of dog's hit luck did this shop owner have? He actually got 2 Whirlwinds parked in front of the shop. However, some people began to suspect that this shop owner had some kind of relationship with some upper-class people. "Ha, we're here. This is the shop. It's a little small, but it's not bad." Zhen Xingming made a cool pose after coming out to show off his presence. "We're finally back." Hui Mao jumped into the shop and yelled, come out and move the stuff, little ones. The triplets and Chang Xiaowu all came out when they heard Huimao's voice and surrounded him happily. The service robot helped to move the things Silan had bought into the shop. Little ones, I'm a friend of your big brother Silan, and I've brought you gifts. Zhen Xingming hurriedly took out the things he had bought from the car and piled them up on the ground. The triplets' eyes lit up, but they didn't go over to Silan directly. Instead, they looked at Silan and only went over to take the things after Silan nodded. Zhen Xingming was very confident in the gifts he had bought. This should leave a good impression on the little kid, right? Look at your manners. Belle walked over and said disdainfully to Zhen Xingming, mind your image. Can't you see that there are still customers in the shop? What customer? Did I get in his way? Zhen Xingming's voice, which was originally quite powerful, suddenly dropped in pitch. The person who was chatting with old man Chang turned around elegantly and smiled at them. His smile was very friendly, but Belle and Zhen Xingming felt like they were suddenly thrown into a glacier. A chill rushed straight to their brains as they took 2 steps back in unison. From the looks of it, they wanted nothing more than to run away right now if possible. Zhen Xingming was filled with regret. Why did he decide to come with them on a whim? What's there to see? It's just a shop, isn't it? Damn, he ran into the person he didn't want to see even in his dreams after running all the way here. Belle was also regretting his decision. He really shouldn't have come. He really shouldn't have. The person smiled when he saw Belle and Zhen Xingming and said gently, why are you two blocking the door? Whoosh! Belle and Zhen Xingming moved to the side as if they were running for their lives. Silan stared at the person sitting inside the shop. He looked about the same age as Ta Sen, and he looked pretty harmless. However, Silan had a feeling that he was the same type of person as Hunting Knife Gaydar. GGGG Teacher Guan. Belle and Zhen Xingming couldn't even speak properly. Guan Feng took a sip of the warm water in his cup and said, don't worry, I'm not here to capture you. Belle and Zhen Xingming let out a small sigh of relief when they heard this. But only a small amount. The two who had been chattering non-stop on the way here didn't even dare let out a fart now. After handing everything over to the service robots, Silan brought the triplets and Chang Xiaowu upstairs into the house. Hey, you two, come over and help me. Silan shouted at Belle and Zhen Xingming from the stairs. Belle and Zhen Xingming shot Guan Feng a cautious glance. When they saw that the man was ignoring them, they ran upstairs like the wind. The two of them collapsed to the ground like they had lost all of their strength. It's over, it's over. Why did we run into him here? Zhen Xingming looked like he was about to cry. I don't know either. I wouldn't have come here even if you beat me to death if I did. Belle rubbed his face hard. After asking Huimao to take the 4 kids to play with their new toys, Silan brought over 2 cold drinks and passed them to the completely absent-minded duo. Drink this. It'll help you calm down. The duo accepted the cold drink and gulped it down in one go. When they were done, they let out a long sigh of relief. Suddenly, Zhen Xingming remembered something and asked, Silan, did Guan Feng come looking for you? The more Zhen Xingming thought about it, the more likely it seemed. They had just run into someone from AF1 and AF2 not long ago, and now they were running into Guan Feng today. How could there be such a coincidence? Plus, who was Guan Feng? There was no way he would run all the way to this poor little place just to chat with an old man. Guan Feng? Is that person called Guan Feng? Silan asked. Yeah, his name is Guan Feng. Zhen Xingming suddenly paused and looked around. I don't think the people down there can hear us if we talk here, can they? Silan nodded. The soundproofing here is pretty good. Zhen Xingming listened for a bit and confirmed that the soundproofing was pretty good before continuing. Guan Feng is a special teacher at AF1. He might look about the same age as Tua Sen, but he's actually the same generation as my grandfather. I don't know how old he is, but his age is a mystery to me. Also, he's a member of Wing, and he's a high-ranking member at that. I think he has a military rank like Major General or something. I'm not sure, but don't underestimate him. He's taught a lot of princes and princesses of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, and even my father was once his teacher. He's a person who's been given special permission to not greet princes and princesses, much less us. Oh, and that Goryo from AF1 who shot at you earlier is Guanfeng's disciple. Goryo's marksmanship was taught by Guanfeng, and the Purgatory Thunder Snakey model bullets he's using are pretty good. However, Guanfeng uses the Purgatory Thunder Snake K model bullets, and that's the most difficult type of Purgatory Thunder Snake. You might be able to dodge Goryo's bullets, but there's no way you'll be able to dodge Guanfeng's K model bullets. I'm not trying to scare you, but you'll know when you actually head to AF1. Guanfeng is a very dangerous man. A shiver ran down Zhen Xingming's spine when he recalled how his father kicked him to AF1 to train him. Guanfeng is fucking inhuman. Silen knew that Guanfeng was a dangerous man, but he was a little curious about the Purgatory Thunder Snake K model bullets Zhen Xingming was talking about. Belle heard Zhen Xingming's words and asked, "How do you know Guanfeng so well?" "I only know a little bit about him myself." Zhen Xingming spread his hands. Guanfeng has a bit of a relationship with the Zhen family, but it's only during my grandfather's generation. In my generation, it's just a weak teacher-student relationship. Maybe he doesn't want to acknowledge it at all. Why is that? Silen asked. Belle curled his lips. Because everyone is too weak in Guanfeng's eyes. It's embarrassing, of course. Chapter 236. Belle and Zhen Xingming had a lot of opinions about Guanfeng, but it was obvious that they were more respectful of him than anything else. After all, Guanfeng could be considered an experienced man. Even his father's generation was his subordinate. No matter how arrogant they usually were, they wouldn't dare act recklessly in front of Guanfeng. While they were talking about Guanfeng, the doorbell rang. Silen opened the door, and the triplets came over to take a look at Belle and Zhen Xingming. They said, "The big brother downstairs wants these two brothers to come over." The big brother downstairs, big brother. Belle said seriously to the triplets, "You should call the man downstairs Grandpa." The triplets looked puzzled. They really didn't know why they were calling the young man downstairs Grandpa. They were going to call him Uncle, but they felt that it sounded too old. That was why they called him Big Brother instead. Zhen Xingming put a hand to his forehead. "Belle, we shouldn't be worrying about how we should address him right now. What do you think Guanfeng will do to us if he asks us to come downstairs?" Belle finally came to his senses and said with a conflicted look on his face, "He said he's not here to take us back." Zhen Xingming curled his lips. You can't understand Fox Guan's words with normal logic. Back in AF1, he was always thinking about how to torture us. If it wasn't for my strong willpower, I would have gone crazy a long time ago. No matter how unwilling they were, they had to go downstairs anyway. Belle and Zhen Xingming took 2 steps before they came back and pulled Silen with them to bolster their courage. In the past, all 3 of them were scolded at the same time. Now that Ulaganua was gone, the 2 of them had to endure too much firepower. However, Guanfeng didn't say anything about Belle and Zhen Xingming. He only said one thing, and it was enough to drive Belle and Zhen Xingming crazy. Guanfeng sipped his tea elegantly. "Let me tell you that AF3's semester exam is about to begin. I heard that it's harder this time, and those who miss or fail the exam won't be able to take a make-up test. They'll be demoted straight away." The corners of Belle and Zhen Xingming's eyes twitched again. They didn't doubt Guanfeng's words at all, but they had a feeling that the old man was the reason why the semester exam was harder this time. Most of the time, Belle and Zhen Xingming would always return to the school during the semester exams no matter what they were doing. Even if they missed the exams, they could always take a make-up exam. Although the exams were a little difficult, Belle and Zhen Xingming were smart enough to pass them every single time. But Guanfeng's words, of course. After he was done, Guanfeng looked at Silen and said, "I heard you dodged 4 of Goryo's shots." "No, he dodged 2 shots. The other 2 shots were blocked with his blade. Celine corrected him. Feng shook his head. I failed if I didn't hit the target. Old man Chang was smart enough to leave with the triplets when he saw Guan Feng talking to Celine and Celine. There were service robots inside the shop, so there were bound to be customers waiting for them. Old Chang wanted to arrange a room for them to talk in, but Ming Chen of Guan Guan didn't. Guan Feng put down his cup and took out a suitcase with a wave of his hand. The box looked very ordinary, but when one touched it, one would realize that this box had a completely different tactile feel from an ordinary box. It was made of a rare metal alloy and was incredibly hard. It wouldn't be flattened even by a large aircraft. Guan Feng passed the suitcase to Celine. This is a gift for you. There aren't many people around your age who can avoid a purgatory thunder snake. Celine didn't refuse the suitcase. Judging from what Belle and Zhen Xingming had told him about Guan Feng, it was pointless to refuse. Guan Feng opened the suitcase towards Celine. There were 2 compartments inside, one of which contained some parts. Celine took a look and realized that they were probably gun parts. The other compartment was filled with some strange-looking metal pieces of different sizes. The front was a little sharp, and the back looked like the tail of an arrow. The thin metal pieces were probably filled with something else. To Belle and Zhen Xingming's surprise, there was a picture of a lightning-like snake. It was the picture of a purgatory thunder snake. There was a K symbol in one of the corners of the suitcase. It was obvious what was inside the suitcase. Guan Feng had given a purgatory thunder snake to Celine and a Model K. They didn't understand why Guan Feng would do this. He should have given a purgatory thunder snake, the most basic Model B. What was the meaning of giving a Model K? Wasn't this a psychological blow? The suitcase's lid was opened at a 90-degree angle to the table, blocking Guan Feng's line of sight. Guan Feng didn't look at the suitcase. He simply stared at Celine and started moving his hands as he spoke. I know that Griffin gave you a recommendation card, so this gift counts as a recommendation from me. However, it's up to you whether or not it works. Guan Feng's movements were too fast. Although Zhen Xingming and Belle could catch some of his movements, they were completely disjointed. They missed far more movements than they caught. When Guan Feng's hands stopped moving, a short-barreled gun appeared in Guan Feng's hands. Guan Feng touched the gunshot wound with his finger. Belle didn't even see where he was touching, but the gun's color changed from bright white to a dull black. An old master really is an old master. Celine watched Guan Feng's movements with a calm expression on his face. He didn't look puzzled or surprised like Belle and Zhen Xingming, so no one could tell what he was thinking. After he was done assembling the gun, Guan Feng picked a bullet. It was the metal plate. Guan Feng had picked the smallest one. After installing it, he tossed out the 7 small parts he had bought from Old Man Chang and fired without even taking the time to aim. The sound of metal hitting metal sounded almost at the same time. The 7 parts weren't thrown in a straight line. Most of them weren't in the same direction, but all of them were hit. The bullet was so fast that it hit the 7 parts one after the other while it was changing trajectories. In the end, it shot into the wall. The most surprising thing was Guan Feng's reaction speed. He had already calculated the angle and timing of the shot the moment he tossed the 7 parts into the air. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. It looked like Guan Feng had carelessly tossed out the parts and fired the gun again. The result was 7 hits in one shot. Guan Feng's hand flashed after he fired the shot, and the gun fell to the ground again. Moreover, the parts landed exactly where they were before they were assembled. He picked up his cup and drank from it again. His expression was exactly the same as before. It was as if he hadn't shot the gun at all. Celine had been silent throughout the entire process, and it was only when Guan Feng closed the box that he raised his hand and accepted it. After he was done drinking, Guan Feng put down his cup and walked toward Belle and Zhen Xingming. Belle and Zhen Xingming immediately snapped out of their daze and tensed up when they saw this. Guan Feng walked in front of Belle and Zhen Xingming and patted their shoulders. He said gently, "Prepare yourselves. I hope your exams go smoothly." Then, Guanfeng walked out of the shop with a bag of things he had just bought. He drove away. Belle and Zhen Xingming were drenched in cold sweat. Old Fox Guan did it on purpose. It was a threat, wasn't it? Wasn't it? He said he hoped their exams go smoothly. Bullshit. Maybe he's thinking about some crazy questions for the exams. Belle, what do we do? Zhen Xingming asked with a bitter expression. What else can we do? We need to go back and prepare ourselves. We need to see if we can find any hints. It'll be embarrassing if old Fox Guan stops us from coming here. Not only will we be laughed at, my father will probably suppress us violently for the next few years. Silan listened to their conversation and asked curiously, "You guys can find hints about the exams too?" Zhen Xingming pointed a finger in the direction Guanfeng had left earlier and said, "He told us that the exam this time would be more difficult, so the hidden meaning behind his words is that there's a leaked question. However, we'll have to find the leaked question and its hints on our own." So you're saying that the exams had already begun the moment he said those words? Belle nodded. That is correct. In fact, every year before the semester exams, everyone would spend their time and energy to search for hints about the exams, but the results were minimal. The three of us, the third one is Uliganuo, who I told you about before, the three of us would work together to search for hints before the exams so that we would have a higher chance of passing the exams. Zhen Xingming looked at Silan sympathetically. If you go to AF1, the exams will be even more crazy. The hints will be given, but they're pretty hard to find. Silan wasn't intimidated by this. In fact, he grew even more excited. This kind of exam was much more interesting than the one at Seven Lights. Many of the exams at Seven Lights were rigid, and the questions that could be used flexibly had a range of reference. Overall, they weren't difficult, and they were as simple as Silan could be. It looks like AF1, AF2, and AF3's exam styles are different. After Guanfeng had left the parts market, he turned on a communicator installed on the car. His character is passable, and he's qualified to enter. Continue to investigate his background, it's fine. AF1 trains talents, identity is secondary. Guanfeng was holding a part he bought from Old Man Chang. It was a flying car part assembled from second-hand parts, and it was assembled by Silan himself. The person on the other side of the communicator said something that made Guanfeng chuckle a couple of times. You know me best. I just want to use Silan to provoke those kids. Belle and Zhen Xingming couldn't eat or sleep in peace because of Guanfeng's intimidation, so they left in a hurry the next day. They were still students after all, and they didn't have complete freedom. Old Man Chang didn't know who Belle, Zhen Xingming, and Guanfeng were. He had asked Silan before, but Silan had only told him that they were all upper-class people. Old Man Chang understood that the reason the trio had come here was because of Silan. They were lucky enough to be able to bask in his glory, not to mention that they would be able to see 2 whirlwinds in their lifetime. As for their identities, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to know too much about them, especially for a commoner like Old Man Chang. There were some things that Old Man Chang didn't ask about after the trio had left. Instead, he talked to Silan about Chang Xiaowu's education. Based on Chang Xiaowu's age, he should be able to receive elementary education at a school in the city. But with the knowledge he already possessed, he could absolutely go straight to an intermediate school. The top 3 schools in the Star region were allowed to give it a try. These schools would hold their preliminary exams on the internet during the special enrollment period. Even some students who were in the middle of their education would have a hard time answering the preliminary exam questions. It was obvious that these schools were very strict with their special enrollment. After the initial test, there was still a second test, an interview, and a series of other processes. If one was a noble, it would definitely be easier to get in if they had strong connections, but for someone like Chang Xiaowu, he would have to go through the same difficult path as Chang Xiaowu and Chang Xiaowu. Belle and Silan had discussed the education of the Chang family's children back at Baron Bader. From what Belle could tell, the prince was more than capable of sending them to the best schools in the Star region or even the imperial capital if they were willing to do so. But according to Silen's understanding of Chang Xiaowu, the kid was proud. He'd rather take the exam himself and be tested step by step than rely on Belle's strong connection. Silen had asked Chang Xiaowu about it, and just as Silen had expected, Chang Xiaowu had rejected him. He had decided to take the exam himself, and he would enter Balin Bader along with Chang Xiaosan and Chang Xiaowu. After all, there were people he knew there, and it would be more convenient for him to contact his family. According to the Grey Cat, it didn't matter which school Chang Xiaowu entered. What he lacked was a springboard, and Baron Batar, which was ranked in the top 10 of this star region, could be considered a good springboard for Chang Xiaowu to jump higher and further. One night, Hui Mao couldn't sleep and rolled around on his bed. Silen, when can we go back? I still have stuff stored at the base. I don't know if Xueqiu and the Miantuan will steal it. He would never admit that he missed those guys. Silen let out a sigh and scratched Hui Mao's chin. I don't know, maybe a trip to the imperial capital could help him if he got to know more people. Let's go to the imperial capital, wheeze. The imperial capital? That sounds like a good place to relax. Oh right, I should pay AF1 a visit too. Hui Mao wanted to know how many idiots like Black Panther were in AF1. Okay. After making up his mind, Silen told old Chang his plan. His name was Ah Lai, and he was also from the civilian district. He was a nice young man, and most importantly, he didn't have any bad intentions. After Silen left, he would be able to take care of old man Chang and the little ones. After all, there were many times when a robot couldn't replace a human. After everything was arranged, Silen and Hui Mao departed for the imperial capital of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Chapter 237. To get to the capital from Old Chang's planet, one had to change flight paths. That was why Silen had to learn about the routes at the major ports before he left. He also had to book a ticket in advance so that he wouldn't have to wait. Booking a ticket was one of the advantages of being a noble. They had their own ports, routes, and starships. They didn't have to pay attention to the situation at the major ports like commoners. Silen had booked a ticket to the largest passenger terminal in the 23rd star region. It was the largest passenger terminal in the 23rd star region, and it was also known as an important transportation hub in the 23rd star region. Of course, that was only for the average person. Nobles had their own routes and ports, so they wouldn't use the same stations and starships as commoners. It would be demeaning to them. Silen and Hui Mao had to take a passenger starship from Old Chang's planet to the terminal. Unlike the route that Silen and Belle took to Balin Bator, this route took much longer. Silen sat in the cabin and pulled up the foldable screen on each seat to observe the situation outside. The passenger starship wasn't a direct route. It would stop at a few stations along the way, and every time it stopped, a passenger spaceship would leave the starship and head to the destination. Once the spaceship left, the starship would continue its journey. Because of this, the seats of the passengers were divided according to the stations. People at the same station would sit in the same cabin. When they arrived at their destination, the cabin would be transferred to the passenger aircraft and transported to their destination by the passenger aircraft. Silen watched the scene on the screen. A passenger spaceship left the starship and flew towards their destination. From the screen, he could see a planet that wasn't all that big, but there was more than one planet nearby. Silen could see another planet a little further away, but it was surrounded by battleships. Yes, not passenger starships, but battleships. He made some visual adjustments and zoomed in on the screen. Perhaps it was a fixed setting, but he couldn't see the planet clearly. He could only see the general situation on the outside. Even so, the general situation was enough for him to guess many things. The planet was at war. The flickering light spots and the obvious black mushroom clouds that rose from time to time told the people who were watching the situation that there was an intense, large-scale war going on this planet. Since these weapons of mass destruction could be used without any scruples, and regardless of whether these weapons would leave a lasting impact, who was the target of the war? It didn't take long for Silen to learn the truth from Huimao, a war among races. Huimao stayed in a place where people wouldn't pay attention and wouldn't be noticed by the starship's defense system and detection system. He learned about what was happening on the planet through some connected networks. Silen had a listening device in his ear, which was specially used to communicate with Huimao. It wouldn't be detected by the passenger starship's detection system. If Silen wanted to say something to Huimao, he only needed to write it on the electronic board set up on his seat. Huimao could know what Silen wrote on the electronic board through the starship's network. After reading it, he would hack it into the network and erase all traces, and it wouldn't be detected by the surveillance personnel on the starship. In fact, Huimao really wanted to communicate with Silen through machine language, but Silen only had a superficial understanding of machine language at the moment. Compared to human language, machine language was far more difficult to understand. Left with no choice, he could only communicate with human language. However, because Silen and Huimao were too familiar with each other, they often used characters that other people couldn't understand to replace the meaning that both sides understood. Therefore, even if they were seen by others, they might not be able to understand what they were saying. The listening device in his ear transmitted the information Huimao had collected. The military clashed with the locals. Oh, the locals look different from us. They're aliens. Wow, what a big bomb. The moment Huimao mentioned aliens, Silen could roughly guess what was going on. Not long after he arrived at the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, Silen had done some research on the situation there. One of the things he learned was that the Mist Bodhisattva Empire was very different from Gal, and that was their attitude toward aliens. In the League of Stars, genetic rank was the most important thing, not race. In fact, there were many sectors in the League of Stars where aliens were the majority, just like the Binger family in Sector H. Especially people like the Mermaid Princess, Warsaw. There were also Ba Dao and Qifeng. They were all aliens, but as long as they had the ability, they too could live a good life in the League of Stars. Needless to say, the Binger family was a very influential force in Sector H. People like Ba Dao and Qifeng could walk on the noisiest street of the most prosperous planet in the 10 free trade sectors, and no one would say anything about them. At most, some people would cast them a curious glance or two, but that was all. There was no obvious rejection. But it was different in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Race was a very distinct topic in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The ruler of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the three kings, the nobles, and the other bloodlines were all biased towards the common human race. Even if there was a difference, it wouldn't be too big. For example, the aliens who looked obviously different from humans and were more beast-like were the absolute targets of oppression. Most of the Empire's slaves were these aliens, the aliens that the nobles called the ugly race, because they looked too different from the common human race. Zani was an alien himself, but first of all, he looked no different from the common human race and didn't attract much attention. Second, he had entered AF2 and joined Wing, so his status was no longer the same as before. Even if there were nobles who were dissatisfied with him, they could only voice it in private and not in public. That being said, if Zani ran into another alien, such as one who looked more like a beast, he probably wouldn't feel any sympathy either. The human heart was strange like that. The difference in race and bloodline was like a deep crack that was difficult to mend. Some of the passengers in the cabin knew what was happening on the planet, so they started talking about it. They laughed and talked about, those aliens, those ugly monsters, those ugly monsters. Silen had always thought that the League of Stars was cruel enough, but after coming to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, he realized that it was even worse. To the people of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, an alien race couldn't even compare to a pure beast. After the war was over, even more aliens on the planet would become slaves and be sold to other people. Those who resisted would be killed, and only the obedient ones would be kept. But even then, they might not be able to live long. Through the image was transmitted to the electronic board, Silen saw the aliens on the planet. They had brown skin, no hair, some hard protrusions on their heads, and a lot of hard folds on their skin that looked like tree bark. The soles of their feet were very long. In short, other than the fact that they all had a head, a pair of hands, a pair of feet, a pair of eyes, a nose, and a mouth, they didn't look much like a normal human. Even if they had their own civilization and their own language, there was nothing they could do about it. In the eyes of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, aliens were disloyal. It would be fine if they obediently obeyed the Empire's orders, but if they tried anything funny, they would be suppressed with great force. The people in the cabin were still talking, but Scylla wasn't in the mood to listen to them. Should he be glad that he looked similar to the people on this planet? Scylla pulled the hibernation helmet over his seat and closed his eyes. He was silently telling the person who was about to drag Scylla over to join the conversation, "I'm going to sleep, don't disturb me." While Scylla was waiting expectantly, the starship finally arrived at the planet they were looking for. From the outside, it was obvious how busy the planet was. Be it day or night, there were a lot of starships and spaceplanes coming and going. When Scylla and the others landed on the planet, it was still daytime. To be more precise, it was morning. Scylla had booked a flight in the afternoon, so Scylla still had time to find a place to eat and comfort his internal organs. The moment Scylla stepped out of the cabin, he only felt one thing: people everywhere. The port was packed with people, and the population density wasn't much lower after they left the port. They were all in a hurry, and they all had one thing in common: they were all civilians. It couldn't be helped. The nobles had their own private ports, so there was no way they would come to a place as crowded as a pig farm. When there were so many people, there would naturally be some people with dirty hands and feet. Those who looked like refugees dressed in rags might not necessarily be rich people. Even if they went out and made a fortune, they would know not to show off their wealth. They dressed themselves like refugees to avoid being remembered. Scylla's attire was considered relatively good among these people. Scylla didn't expect it to be like this. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Scylla quickly left the port after punching a person who was about to attack him. After leaving a certain distance, he and Huimao went to a restaurant to eat, but the few restaurants they found were basically full. Since there was still time, Scylla and Huimao took a taxi and went to a place further away from the port. There were indeed some elegant places further away, but the prices were too expensive. However, Huimao had his eyes on the big screen outside the hotel that advertised its signature dish. Fish. What a strange fish. It looks delicious. Scylla, let's go there. Huimao raised his paw and pointed in that direction. Scylla looked over. Just by looking at the exterior of the hotel, he knew that the expenses inside were not low. Hulu, let's make a deal. Right now, we don't have as much money as when we were in the League of Stars. We can go there, but other than the platter of fish from the Four Seas, I'll order everything else. Scylla didn't have the heart to turn down the gray cat's offer when he saw that it was staring at all kinds of nameless fishes swimming around the big screen. He guessed that the gray cat would throw a tantrum if he did, and this fellow would act stupidly when it did. I know. Huimao nodded repeatedly. After getting Huimao's guarantee, Scylla walked into the hotel with it. The hotel's service was pretty good. There was even a special pet parlor, which was filled with people with pets. As soon as they entered, they saw a large mastiff. Perhaps because of the presence of this large mastiff, the pets in the pet parlor were quite obedient. They didn't dare to make a sound, curling up in the arms of their owners and eating the food that their owners fed them. But Huimao was an exception. Huimao walked in front, walking around the parlor with his tail raised. He found a place that he was satisfied with and jumped onto the table. He clapped and scratched, indicating that Scylla should sit there. Seeing that Huimao was ignoring him, the large mastiff announced its dominance and let out a low growl. Huimao was probably in a good mood today. After hearing the large mastiff's warning, he was still in the mood to stick out his tongue at the large mastiff. The large mastiff was also intelligent. Previously, it was the boss here, and all the pets that came in obediently chose to obey it. However, this cat dared to be presumptuous in public. The cat could tolerate it, but the dog couldn't. After a while, Sillin brought Hui Mao to a small cubicle, a cubicle that only Sillin and Hui Mao used. This was arranged by the hotel staff, and they didn't pay extra money. After all, if Sillin and Hui Mao stayed in the pet parlor, the hotel's loss would be much greater. And the large mastiff that was still in the pet parlor had a few obvious claw marks on its nose. Hui Mao didn't care about the guys that it classified as idiots outside. It buried its head in eating its foresees fish platter. But its ears that moved twice like a radar from time to time told Sillin that this guy was paying attention to the situation around the hotel. Suddenly, Hui Mao paused, raised its head, licked its lips, and said to Sillin, "There's a situation in one of the rooms." The image projected from Hui Mao's eyes converged on the soup on Sillin's plate. The image was of a luxurious suite on the top floor of the hotel. There were a few people outside the suite, and there were also people inside. In the suite sat a young master. There was only a 13 or 14-year-old boy sitting at such a large table, enjoying the table full of dishes. The guards that guarded this young master were all wearing uniform clothes. The clothes were made of very good material, which ordinary families couldn't afford. Logically speaking, they should be a noble, but strangely, these people didn't have any representative symbols on their clothes, so it was impossible to tell which noble they were. Suddenly sensing a small commotion outside the door, the young man asked his men to bring in the people outside. 2 people were sent into the suite, a middle-aged man and a beautiful young girl. The middle-aged man was one of the hotel's management staff, and the young girl was a waitress. Looking at the young girl's torn collar and the slap mark on her tear-stained face, Sillin could roughly guess what had happened. Although the young man was young, he was clearly able to see things clearly. When the young girl saw the young man, it was as if she had seen her savior. She told him everything that the middle-aged man had forced her to do. The young man smiled and comforted the young girl, then ordered his men to send the young girl out, and picked up the spoon to eat the porridge in front of him again. The young girl was very grateful. She took 2 steps forward and stopped before the bodyguards stopped her. She bowed to the young man, wiped her tears, and was about to turn and leave. But the moment she turned, the young girl and the middle-aged man who was kicked in suddenly pulled out a gun and shot at the young man. But not far from the young man, other than a slight electric fluctuation, the young man was still fine. Transparent energy shield. Almost at the same time the young girl and the middle-aged man fired, their necks twisted irregularly with a crack, and then fell limply, their eyes no longer bright. Strangely, none of the bodyguards standing around the young man made a move, and the 2 people's necks were broken just like that. The young man drank a spoonful of porridge, and his expression did not change. He gently waved his hand, and the 2 people lying on the ground were silently dragged into a room on the side. Still, it was not the bodyguards who did it. From the video, the 2 dead people seemed to have automatically floated into the room. Sillin knew that someone was invisible beside the young man, and the 2 assassins did not notice at all. But just from the way the 2 people's necks were twisted, the invisible person acted very quickly, killed them in one blow, and was very skilled. One look and you could tell that he was a veteran. The young man put down his spoon, frowned, and looked around. One of the people standing behind him asked, "Young master, what's wrong?" "I have a feeling that I'm being watched." The bodyguards looked at each other, all very puzzled. They had already confirmed that there were no surveillance cameras in this room, including the entire hotel's surveillance system. Even if there were surveillance cameras, no one would be able to see them. The young man stood up and walked around, passing by every bodyguard. After he finished walking, he suddenly said, "Take out all your communication devices." After the young man said this, Hui Mao cut off the video. "Wow, who is that little guy? Isn't he too sensitive?" Hui Mao cried. "That's called sensitive. Same meaning." Hui Mao flicked his ear. "I felt something was wrong there before. So there's an invisible person hiding there. Alright, hurry up and eat. We'll leave after eating, so that we don't get into trouble. Sillin patted Huimao's head. Have you erased the traces? Nonsense, of course. Let that kid worry about it. After that, Huimao stopped talking about the young man and hurried to finish his fish. Meanwhile, inside the hotel suite, the young man stared at the pile of communication devices in front of him with a frown. After a while, he said, "Send these back and have the technical department check them again. Check this hotel thoroughly." Yes, young master. When they were finally done eating, Sillin and Huimao rested for a while before heading to the airport to board the plane. Huimao was so familiar with the young man that he disappeared in a flash. Sillin wasn't worried that the young man would be discovered, so he boarded the aircraft and found his seat. He boarded the aircraft an hour early, and Sillin closed his eyes to rest after he sat down. Although his eyes were closed, his mind was still thinking about what he had seen in the hotel today. Who was that young man? Sillin was convinced that the young man was a noble, and a high-ranking one at that. How could a 13 or 14-year-old react so calmly to an assassination attempt? Compared to Belle and Zhen Xingming whom Sillin knew, the young man was far too calm. It was as if he was indifferent to death. People like him were either used to seeing life and death, or they were naturally cold and apathetic. Time passed quickly while Sillin was lost in thought. 1 minute before the aircraft was scheduled to land, the person sitting next to Sillin finally arrived. There were 2 seats on each side of the aircraft. Sillin sat on the outside, and the young man sat on the inside. There were 2 seats on each side of the corridor. The young man sitting next to him looked like an optimistic young man. "Oh my, I finally made it." Phew, the young man let out a long sigh before sitting down. He looked at Sillin and flashed him a friendly smile. "Have a good trip, brother." Have a good trip. One does not slap a smiling person. Since the other party was acting very friendly, Sillin could not keep a straight face. Not long after he sat down, the aircraft finally took off after a series of inspections. It flew into a starship at the spaceport, and just like the previous flight, the passenger cabin was transferred to the passenger starship's main cabin. However, not long after the passenger starship left the planet, it suddenly came to a stop before it could enter warp speed. This was because there was a noble's carrier in front of it. It was common knowledge that civilian starships had to make way for the noble spaceships and starships. The ticket Sillin bought was for a normal starship. Luxurious passenger starships were too expensive, and Sillin didn't want to spend the money. Normal passenger starships were slower, and some ports and routes were not open to them. Therefore, it took longer than luxurious starships, and the cabin conditions were much worse. Therefore, it was unavoidable to fly and stop on a civilian starship. This was also why many people couldn't stand it and chose luxurious starships. Sillin looked to the side. The young man sitting next to him was already drooling in sleep. Even the loud discussions around him didn't disturb him. Finally, they could continue flying. A voice came from the cabin, reminding the passengers to wear their hibernation helmets to avoid any discomfort, and what to do if they did. In fact, for people who felt uncomfortable flying on a starship, if the situation was serious, it could be life-threatening. Therefore, such reminders would usually be broadcasted before the flight. However, most passengers had to take the initiative. After all, the people here weren't nobles, so even if someone died, it wouldn't affect them too much. Sillin looked at the guy who was sleeping soundly next to him. After some thought, he woke him up. What's wrong?" The person who was woken up by Sillin was sleepy. He smacked his lips and wiped off the saliva at the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. He looked at Sillin in confusion. He was just puzzled, not annoyed by being woken up. "We're about to enter flight mode. Aren't you going to wear your hibernation helmet?" Sillin pointed around. Most of the people in the cabin had put on their hibernation helmets. Only a few people, perhaps used to it, didn't wear their hibernation helmets. Hearing Silen's words, the person scratched his head and said with a smile, "Oh, thank you." Although the person thanked him, he still didn't wear his hibernation helmet. Instead, he pointed to himself and said, "My physique isn't bad. I don't need to wear it." Silen didn't bother with him anymore. Silen didn't wear it either. When the surroundings were still quiet, he didn't want to wear it either. It was too stuffy. Midway through the flight, the person woke up once. He was hungry and ordered the starship's combo. When the robot brought the combo over, Silen woke up. "Sorry to wake you up." The person took the combo from the robot, feeling a little embarrassed. "It's fine." Silen also ordered a combo. "I also want to replenish my energy." The person chuckled, opened the combo box, and started eating. He seemed to be very hungry and ate in a sorry state. After eating, the person chatted with Silen about the combo. Although he ate in a hurry, his evaluation of the combo was very powerful and pointed out the key points. As Silen listened, he pointed at the corner of his mouth and said, "There is food residue." "Oh." The person wiped it with his sleeves. Silen pointed at his nose again. The person stuck out his tongue and licked it. Silen, if he wasn't mistaken, this person's tongue was too long. After licking, the person realized what was going on and turned to look at Silen. Seeing that Silen didn't show any signs of discrimination, he licked it again. This time, he licked it even further. It went past his eyes and almost reached his eyebrows. Silen raised his eyebrows. "Your tongue is quite long." The person's mouth gaped. "Don't you find it strange?" "Strange. Don't you think that?" The person opened his mouth again and pointed at his teeth. Silen watched as the person's teeth moved. His teeth intersected and rubbed against each other, causing the food residue to come out from the gaps between his teeth. Silen was silent for a moment. Quite unique. He didn't even need to brush his teeth. After confirming that Silen didn't show any signs of discrimination, the person smiled happily. "My name is Libero. Nice to meet you. I'm Silen." Silen continued to finish his meal. A mutant. Indeed, Libero was a mutant. Although he looked like a normal person, these small details showed that he was different from a normal person. If one looked closely, they would find that Libero's pupils weren't round, but oval. Libero's fingers could become very long or retract, just like a normal person. This was just what Libero showed. "You don't discriminate against mutants?" "That's strange," Libero said. "There's nothing to discriminate about. I'm not a noble." Libero shook his head. "In the Empire, whether you're a noble or not, everyone discriminates against mutants. That is, unless you reach a level where no one dares to discriminate against you." As he said this, Libero's eyes lit up. Silen nodded, but he didn't say anything. It wasn't easy to find someone who didn't discriminate against mutants. Libero was very happy, and he chatted with Silen for the entire journey. However, it was mostly Libero talking. Silen didn't say much. With people chatting, the journey became a lot faster. The final stop of this trip was the Imperial Capital, but very few people actually arrived at the Imperial Capital station. When they arrived at the Imperial Capital Star Field, many people in the cabin began to change their clothes. They changed out of their ordinary clothes and put on expensive and bright clothes. It seemed that such luxurious clothes could increase their confidence a little. Silen and Libero looked at these people. They hadn't expected this, and they hadn't prepared for it. The people in the same cabin were all going to the capital, but Libero and Silen didn't explain in detail what they were going to do. Libero only said that he was here to study, and Silen said that he was here to try his luck. Many people came to the capital to try their luck. There were many nobles in the capital, and there were many opportunities. However, the pressure that came with it was also much greater. Most of the people in the same cabin were here to try their luck. After parting ways with Libero, Silen met up with Huimao and started to think about what to do next. After thinking about it, Sillin decided to go to AF1 first. The matter with the Gen family wasn't easy to solve. However, Sillin didn't expect to see Libero again at the entrance of AF1. Chapter 238. AF1 wasn't hard to find, but it was hard to enter. Sillin had come to the preparatory campus. With their current identities, they wouldn't be able to enter the official campus. The preparatory campus was located in a different place from the official campus. In other words, they were on different planets. The preparatory campus wasn't far from the official campus. Sillin could see the planet where the official campus was located from this planet. The official campus of AF1 was located on a huge planet. There were 3 schools on the planet, AF1, AF2, and AF3. There were a few satellite planets around the planet. AF1's preparatory campus was located on one of these satellite planets. Of course, the central planet could be seen with the naked eye from the satellite planet. There were not many complicated tests required to enroll into AF3. However, AF1 and AF2 were different. AF1 was usually the leader of AF1, and the test would be held at the preparatory campus of AF1. The instructors from AF1 and AF2 would conduct a selection process together. After that, they would allocate the students based on the results of the selection process to determine who would be eliminated, who would be assigned to AF1, AF2, or AF3. The selection process for AF1's preparatory campus was carried out in stages. It was arranged according to the total number of recommendation cards sent out and the time. Sillin was in luck. The next stage of the selection process was not far away. There were specialized navigation robots in the capital, and all Sillin had to do was to find one at random. After entering the attached destination and his identity information, a specialized navigation robot came over and brought Sillin to a place where a specialized car was waiting for him. After Sillin showed his recommendation card, he was brought to this satellite planet. The navigation robot the size of a watermelon explained the arrangements to Sillin and brought Sillin to the entrance of the preparatory campus. It was also here that Sillin met Libero. Libero wasn't alone. There was a big guy with him. Libero called him Ironhead. Ironhead was also a mutant. Strictly speaking, Libero and Ironhead were considered half-mutants or mixed bloods. Of course, that was just a nice way of saying it. To put it bluntly, some nobles would call them bastards. Many nobles who thought highly of themselves looked down on them the most. They thought the existence of mixed bloods was a disgrace. Libero was shocked when he saw Sillin. He didn't expect Sillin to be here as well. However, after the initial shock, he was overjoyed. Libero was very happy to meet someone who didn't discriminate against mixed bloods like him. Previously, he thought that they were just passers-by and had no deep relationship with each other. But now, it was different. They were all comrades in the same trench. Libero introduced Ironhead to Sillin. When Ironhead saw that Sillin didn't show any disdain, he also showed a friendly smile. "Hey, Sillin, have you reported it yet?" Libero asked. "No." Sillin shook his head. They had stayed at the station for a long time. They had spent a lot of time eating with Huimao. It would be troublesome if this cat didn't have enough to eat. "We've already reported it. Let me take you there." Libero was very enthusiastic. They had just arrived, so they would be assigned temporary dormitories after reporting. If the 3 of them applied for a dormitory together, they would be put together. This was better than people they didn't know or people who discriminated against them. Reporting was very simple. They just needed to show their recommendation cards. Every recommendation card contained information about the person who recommended them. Sillin's carry card contained Griffin's information. Every tutor in AF1 and AF2 had to bear a certain amount of pressure when they gave out a recommendation card. This was because the recommended people might not necessarily be accepted. The final deduction ratio, which was the ratio of the number of recommendation cards given out to the number of people accepted, was closely related to the tutors. A tutor with a deduction ratio close to 1 would definitely be more respected in the affiliated schools. When Silen handed the recommendation card to the person in charge, the person didn't pay much attention to it. After all, there were many tutors in the affiliated schools, and there would be many people who recommended them too. However, when the person in charge swiped the card and read the information, his attitude changed a little. He looked at Silen curiously. He didn't expect Griffin to recommend someone who looked so ordinary. After getting the dormitory card, Silen, Libero, and Ironhead went to the temporary dormitory area. Hui Mao came with them as a pet and didn't participate in the beast test. This was because he didn't have a recommendation. Even if he did, Hui Mao wouldn't participate in the test. The temporary dormitory was similar to the dormitory that Silen saw in Baron Bader. However, it was a 5-person dormitory. Everyone had their own bedroom, but they shared the training room and living room. When Silen and the other two arrived at their assigned dormitory, there was already a person living there. From the looks of it, this person had been here for a while. When Silen and the others came in, the person seemed to have just woken up. He was still a little sleepy. When he saw Silen and the others, he stretched. "Yo, your roommates are here. All 3 of you are." Libero first introduced himself, then introduced Silen and Ironhead. The person scratched his messy hair and chuckled. "I'm Wally. I come from a small corner of a planet in the 17th star sector." As he spoke, Wally sniffed. "You guys bought breakfast? It's lunch now, right?" Libero said helplessly. Wally rubbed his hands. "Whatever. Can I join?" "Sure. We bought enough anyway." Silen put the things on the big table in the living room. Hui Mao squatted in front of his plate and cut Wally's spoon into 3 pieces when it reached over. However, Wally liked to tease Hui Mao. When a spoon broke, he would change to a fork. Finally, he succeeded in stabbing a small fish out of Hui Mao's plate. Hui Mao was so angry that he jumped up and scratched Wally's face. However, Wally seemed to be quite open-minded. When he talked about his trip to AF1's preparatory campus, he summed it up in one word: debt collection. The place where Wally lived had nothing to do with the people of Fu High School. It was even more remote than Old Chang's planet. However, one day, Wally ran into a person who had forcefully landed his spaceship near his house. He was in a good mood, so he gave the person a meal. Then, the 2 of them got into a fight. Wally was beaten black and blue, and no one in the entire street could recognize him. Then, the person kicked Wally twice, took all the food in his house, and left. Before he left behind a card and some money, telling Wally to find him at Fu High School, and that he would make sure Wally didn't have to worry about food or clothing. After that, Wally came. Listening to Wally's story, Silen felt that the teachers of the affiliated schools were quite unique. They were all unpredictable. Wally was not a mixed blood like Libero and Ironhead. Like Silen, he was a normal person. However, someone who could get a recommendation card from an affiliated school's teacher had to have something special about him, even if the teacher's methods were a little strange. Tai Tu's parents were servants of a noble family. Because they saw that Tai Tu had some ability, they used their connections to get a recommendation card and recommended him. But if Tai Tu were to be eliminated, it was easy to imagine that their family would have a hard time in the future. That was why Ironhead was under a lot of pressure. Libero, on the other hand, was only able to get a recommendation card because of his teacher's connections. However, Libero did not want to talk about the details. Anyone could see that things were not as simple as he made them out to be. There had to be more to it, but since Libero was unwilling to talk about it, Silen and the others did not ask anymore. The last one was the most special. He was an 8-year-old child of noble birth, but he was more lively than most nobles. He didn't pretend to be arrogant, indifferent, and sarcastic like some other nobles. Although he called them "this young master" every time he opened his mouth, it was obvious from his eyes that he didn't mean to belittle Celine and the others at all. It was more like a colloquialism, just a habit. The one who brought the child here was an old servant. The old servant reminded Sillin of Brizette, who was always by Lung's side. Although he was polite and always had a smile on his face, he was not to be underestimated. According to the rules of AF1, servants were not allowed to be brought here. Therefore, the old servant only brought the child here and placed a lot of things in the room. The storage cabinets in the living room and the kitchen were filled with things. The old servant said that these were greeting gifts for everyone. He hoped that Sillin and the others could help his young master. This was the young master's first time away from home. Sillin and the others promised that they would take care of him. After all, they were all roommates in the same dorm. Sillin believed that the old servant must have investigated all four of them before coming here. Otherwise, he would not have brought the young master here so easily. The child's name was Taita, but his surname was not mentioned. The old servant finally left after the child impatiently called him back. After the old servant left, Taita jumped up and down in the bedroom that the old servant had tidied up and cheered loudly as if he had been liberated. Sillin and the others looked at each other. As expected, it was a child. Taita did not put on airs. Even though he spoke with the accent that nobles always had, his actions left people speechless. For example, Taita would say, "Hey, you guys, come over and talk to this young master." But in reality, Taita would run over to Sillin and the others and join in the conversation. Although he was young, he knew a lot. "Hey, young Master Taita, do you know how the selection test will be conducted this time?" Wally asked as he lay on a chair and cracked some nuts. Sillin did not like nuts very much, but Huimao did. Therefore, while they were chatting, Sillin would shell Huimao and give some to Taita. Taita ate the nuts that Sillin had peeled as he stretched out his palm and spread his fingers. AF1's test has always had 5 rounds. It's called AF1's 5th test. AF1's 5th test. Is it difficult? Libero asked. Taita chewed on the nuts and frowned. I heard it's quite difficult. In the first round, you have to use a pen to write on paper. Right? You mean, you have to use a pen to write word by word on that kind of paper? Ironhead was troubled. Even as a servant, he had never used paper to write. He had always used an electronic tablet. If he really used a pen to write, he probably would not be able to read what he wrote. Libero and Ironhead were in the same situation, but Sillin and Wally were much calmer. They were more familiar with this kind of thing. Sillin handed a peeled nut to the child. Continue. Taita took the nut and threw it into his mouth, crunching noises as he chewed on it. His teeth were quite good. Then, he started counting with his fingers. After that, there's the stress test, the 3 tests, the cooperation test, and the final interview. But don't worry, there's no so-called passing standard for each round. I don't know what they're selecting based on. Some obviously did badly in the written test, but were accepted in the end. Some who did well were rejected in the end. Taita told them everything he knew, but the more Sillin and the others learned, the more they felt that AF1's selection test was so different. Chapter 239. It was their first day here, and they hadn't calmed down yet, so they chatted a little late that night. In order to take care of Taita, the youngest of the hostel, Sillin and the others helped him a lot. It was obvious at first glance that the child lived like a prince. Even when he was bathing, there was a robot to scrub his back, and the old servant had arranged everything for him. Sillin and the others had seen Taita's room before. After the old servant had finished decorating the room, they had all taken a look. It was so complete that Taita didn't have to do many things himself. He only had to give orders to the housekeeping robots and the AI system. As soon as he saw the thick plush carpet in Taita's room, Huimao felt an itch on his back. He wanted to rub against it immediately. In fact, Huimao did that, but Sillin twisted him back before he went to sleep. There are a few hidden surveillance cameras in this dorm. There are 3 in Taida's room, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the bathroom, and 2 in the living room. Hui Mao sat unhappily next to Silin after he was twisted back into his room. The final conclusion was that other than Silin's and the other 3's rooms, the rest of the dorm was monitored. Looks like Taida has a pretty deep background. Silin scratched Hui Mao's chin. He thought about what Taida had said about the 5th exam in AF5 and closed his eyes to sleep. Before he could fall asleep, Silin was woken up by Hui Mao's slap. What? Silin didn't even open his eyes. That kid can't sleep. He's probably homesick because he's not used to it. Through the surveillance in Taida's room, Hui Mao knew what was going on in the room. Since we're here, we have to get through it. 10 minutes later. The cat's paw slapped Silin's back. What's wrong with you? Silin still didn't open his eyes. That kid looks like he's been wronged. Do you have the heart to do that? People always learn to be strong while they cry. It's a way of growing up. Hui Mao flicked his ears. No one knew if he understood. Another 10 minutes passed. Silin suddenly turned over and opened his eyes. In front of him, Hui Mao raised his claws and was about to slap down again. I really admire you. At the same time, on another planet in the imperial capital, in a room in a vast castle-like building complex, a few people were staring at the situation in Taida's room displayed on a large screen. Seeing the 8-year-old child rolling around on the bed, unable to fall asleep, the 2 women wiped their tears with handkerchiefs. I told you not to send him in so early. Look, the child can't even sleep when he's away from home. That's right, Dad. Taida is still young, and you know what kind of place AF1 is. Besides, Taida doesn't need to walk the same path as us. He'll be fine with us protecting him. I agree. Let's bring Taida back, another man in military uniform said. The people around them all looked at the man standing in the middle, who was almost old but still looked handsome and extraordinary. The beautiful woman standing on the side wiped her tears and glanced at her father who was standing straight in the middle. She thought to herself, keep pretending. The old man is the one who loves Taida the most. I don't know what he heard from some people in the army this time, but he was so emotional that he sent Taida over. He regrets it more than anyone else, but he didn't say it out because he wanted to save face. Hearing the words of the people around him, the old man sighed inwardly in relief. It's better to bring him back. He's too young. Those people can say whatever they want. It's not like he'll lose a piece of flesh. When Taida grows up in 2 years, he'll send him over. I'm sure Taida won't disappoint him. The child is still too young. Too young. My heart aches for him. The old man was about to speak when the doorbell to Taida's room rang. Taida immediately sat up and rearranged his facial expression so that he didn't look as depressed and helpless as before. This made the people staring at the screen feel sad again. Taida opened the door. Before he could say anything, something was thrown at him. He quickly caught it and saw that it was Hui Mao. Silin yawned and said to Taida, "It's for your bed. This cat likes your carpet, so let him sleep here. Of course, if you don't want to, you can just throw him out." After that, Silin went back to his room and went back to sleep. Taida blinked at the door and looked at Hui Mao in his arms, before he closed the door and went back inside. As soon as he returned to Taida's room, Hui Mao couldn't wait to jump onto the carpet and start rubbing against it. When it looked up and saw that Taida was staring at it without blinking, Hui Mao got up and shook its fur. "Don't worry about me. Go to sleep. I'll guard the door for you." After that, Hui Mao went back to rubbing its fur on the carpet. After Hui Mao's antics, Taida was in a much better mood. After watching for a while, he picked up the soft cushion from the bed and sat down next to Hui Mao. The temperature in the bedroom was very suitable, and it was intelligently controlled, so there was no need to worry about catching a cold at all. Half an hour later, the man and the cat fell asleep on the carpet. The people in front of the big screen didn't say anything for a long time. In the end, the old man didn't take Taida back. He wanted to see Taita's test results first. The test of AF1 finally arrived under the anticipation of more than 1,000 people. All of them had recommendation cards, but they received them at different times. When the number of people reached the required number, AF1 would start the countdown for the test. The first of the 5 tests of AF1 was the written test that Taita had mentioned. In the previous stage, the written test only had 1 test paper, and the time limit was 3 hours. There weren't many questions, but they were very difficult. But this time was obviously different. The written test this time was 10 hours long. There were no breaks in the middle, and people had to bring their own food. So, apart from going to the toilet, the rest of the time was spent in the examination room. None of the candidates knew where their seats would be. Everyone gathered in the venue and sat down casually. Then, a barrier rose around the chairs to cover everyone, and they were moved to the examination room. Inside the examination room, you could only see the white light barrier around you. You couldn't see what was on the other side of the barrier. However, people standing outside the examination room could see everything clearly. So, don't try anything funny, or you'd end up in a very bad situation if you were caught. When everyone was moved to the examination room, they found that they were facing a thick book of test papers. That's right, it was a book. This included basic personal information as well as various aspects of the test and so on. Silan looked at it. The front was all basic information, including personal hobbies, what books you read, what information you read, what news you followed online, living habits, and so on. Many people tried to write positive things, but they didn't know that during the test, the tutors would arrange the test questions according to the information you wrote. If they found out that you lied, the tutors would make things very difficult for you. Silan didn't write too much. He only wrote down shooting and so on. After all, Guanfeng's gun was there, so it was only a matter of time before he wrote it down. These basic personal information also showed how much a person knew about themselves. It was also possible to tell whether a person was arrogant or had low self-esteem from the information they filled in. However, Silan didn't know what the written test standards were. Taita had said that some people were admitted even though they couldn't write. However, when Silan wrote the first word, Silan understood a little why there was a book of test papers. A person's handwriting would reflect some of that person's circumstances. A person's handwriting was like a person's. Their handwriting would become vigorous and steady as they grew older or more experienced. It was different at different times. If a person was in a good mood, their handwriting would be neat and tidy. If a person was in a bad mood, their handwriting would be crooked and crooked. The pressure of writing, the structure of the strokes, the size of the word, and even the level of the stroke could reflect a lot of things. For example, a person's habitual strength, self-awareness, the coordination between thinking and behavior, and so on. The speed of writing was also related to a person's comprehension. The layout of the words could also reflect the writer's attitude towards the outside world. Of course, there was also the issue of mentality. If a person's mentality changed, their handwriting would change along with it. There were definitely a lot of people whose handwriting became more and more sloppy as they went on, but there were also people whose handwriting didn't change much from beginning to end. That was the difference. After Silan was done filling in the basic information, he flipped to the opening questions. This was Silan's habit. Back at 7 Lights, he would select all the questions and go through them once before he started working on them even if he didn't need to write with a pen. The first question, noun explanation. It was a familiar question, but Silan couldn't help but feel lost as he stared at 5 whole pages of noun explanation. 99% of the questions were unfamiliar terms, and Silan hadn't heard of them since he came to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. He continued to flip to the back. Questions and answers, calculations, discussions. I'm sorry, but there were no multiple-choice questions or true or false questions here. If you don't know, then you don't know. It wasn't like you could make a blind guess. Just as Taita had said, the questions covered a wide range of topics, ranging from the formation of the universe, quantum mechanics, evolutionary history, molecular formula, human reproduction, positive and abnormal physiological indicators, and ancient questions like which came first, the chicken or the egg. When he flipped to the fifth last question on the third to last page, Silen raised an eyebrow. There was only a short, inconspicuous line of words there: choose 30 of the questions above. No bonus points for writing more than that. Most of the time, such words would appear at the beginning of a test paper or at the end of a test paper. But it was very novel, and it was the fifth last question on the third to last page of this test paper. It wasn't easy to notice at all. There was no telling how many people would be shocked by this sentence in the end. Silen shook his head and continued to look at the questions at the back. The questions at the back were pretty much the same, except for the last one. After confirming that there were no other hidden meanings, Silen began to write. 2 hours later, Silen finished the first 30 questions and the questions at the back. All that was left was the last question. The last question's title was this: if you feel that the above questions aren't enough to showcase your characteristics or abilities, please feel free to answer them here. After thinking about it, Silen drew a cat in the answer area of this question on a whim. It was a chubby cat with a fish biscuit in its mouth. After answering the question, Silen was not in a hurry to hand in his test paper. After checking it once, he laid on the table and began to catch up on his sleep. He felt that the later tests of AF1 would be very exhausting, so he needed to accumulate energy in advance. There were some instructors from AF1 and AF2 walking around the examination room. They could clearly see the petty tricks of the examinees. Some gave warnings, some had their marks deducted, but none of them were disqualified on the spot. There were also a few examinees like Silen who finished their papers early. They either handed in their papers early or slept on the table like Silen, so Silen did not stand out among them. However, the examinees who finished their questions within 3 hours were recorded by the chief examiner. Silen was woken up by the bell that rang the end of the test. After leaving the examination room, he met up with Libero and the others at the agreed place. Judging from Libero and Ironhead's expressions, they probably did not see the sentence on the third last page. Now, the two of them were still depressed. Wally was still as carefree as ever. Although Taita did not see the sentence, he was in a good mood. If he passed the test, so be it. After all, he did not feel too much pressure. The examinees who finished the first round of the written test did not have much time to rest. The spaceplane sent them to another place for the next round of tests. The stress test was to check the examinees' physical reactions to stress, such as recovery ability, immune tolerance, and physiological reactions under conditions such as low oxygen and low pressure. The examinees' physical limits and physiological defects were also checked. The results of the test were divided into 5 grades from highest to lowest, S, A, B, C, and D. However, the examinees did not know the final results of the test. Under such stress, mutants would reveal another side of themselves, revealing the other half of their bloodline. However, this information was kept confidential. The examinees did not know about anyone other than the instructors in charge. Silen underwent a basic drug allergy test, wound healing test, low oxygen and low pressure test, and a series of other tests. After Silen left, the examiner wrote an S on Silen's final grade. What happened next was just as Silen had predicted. The examinees were not given much time to rest at all. After the second round of tests was over, the examinees were sent to another part of the planet for the third round of tests. This time, however, Silen noticed that the number of examinees was a little less. Although it was not a lot, there were still more than 50 examinees missing. The third round of tests was also known as the 3 tests. The examinees would choose 3 of the tests they wanted to take. Silen chose shooting, close combat, and assembly. The reason why he chose these 3 wasn't because Silen was the most confident in them, but because everyone else knew about them. At the very least, Guan Feng definitely knew about them. Needless to say, the assembly was over very quickly. The examiners in charge of assembly had even studied the parts Silen had assembled and written a very long comment on Silen's test results. As for what they wrote, Silen did not know. In close combat, Silen's opponent was a big blockhead who looked like an iron head. This person was an expert in strength, and he was able to punch a hole in the reinforced ground with a single punch. Not only that, he was completely fine as he continued his next punch. At first, Silen chose to defend and not attack. It was only after he had a general understanding of the big guy's strength and allowed him to display enough of his abilities that he ended the battle in one blow. The last test was shooting. There were a lot of people who chose shooting, and Silen had to line up to come here. Unlike the previous tests, shooting was half open to the public. The examinees who chose to shoot could see everyone else's performance in the shooting field. There were a lot of excellent shooters, and every examinee displayed their best skills. However, there was a phenomenon in the shooting field that the examinees cheered a lot, but the instructors in charge did not react much. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.